The quest for the American dream is what countless individuals aspire to attain: a home, a loving family, and a thriving career. One woman in California had finally realized this dream. She had everything she ever wanted and had put in immense effort to achieve it. However, in a matter of seconds, everything turned upside down when she found herself in an unexpected situation with only moments to survive. Now, let's get into the story for today. For generations, people from across the world have come to the United States seeking a fresh new start. Whether they're in search of fame and fortune, fleeing economic hardship, or simply wanting to make a better life for themselves and their families, moving halfway across the world is a life-changing experience. For those seeking new opportunities, they're willing to do everything they can to realize their dreams. People who have often arrived with nothing have managed to build a life and a legacy for which their families are forever grateful. But sometimes, the happy and fulfilling life that someone has created in their adopted country is ripped away so brutally that it's difficult to comprehend how this could happen. Today's case does take place in California, but in order to understand everything, I've got to take you out of the United States altogether and introduce you to a woman named Ildiko Krajnyak. She was born on June 8, 1969, in the city of Miskolc, which is in the northeastern part of Hungary in Central Europe. Miskolc is the country's fourth largest city, and it is 115 miles from the capital of Budapest. Ildiko grew up with her parents, Laszlo and Juliana, and her brother, also named Laszlo after their father. Unfortunately, there isn't much that we could find out about Ildiko's childhood, but from what I could gather, she was extremely close with her family. Life in Central and nearby Eastern Europe was not easy, especially during the 1970s. What I found out about Ildiko's upbringing is that, following the end of World War II, Hungary was occupied by the Soviet Union, which today we know as Russia. A communist government was established at the time. The country suffered economically, resulting in an uprising in 1956 as Hungarian people attempted to take back control of their country. Their efforts were thwarted by the Soviets, who killed 2,500 Hungarians in violent confrontations. They arrested and imprisoned 26,000 more and executed at least 350 citizens. The extreme political unrest and instability were the catalyst for over 200,000 Hungarians fleeing the country. But for those left behind, especially people of Ildiko's parents' generation, life under an oppressive communist regime was very difficult. By the time Ildiko was born, economic and cultural policy reform was just starting to improve, and so was the quality of life. People began demonstrating against the government, and living standards were getting better. However, high rates of alcoholism and self-inflicted deaths still affected many people as they struggled to live in this kind of climate. It wasn't until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 that communism began to fall throughout much of Eastern Europe, including Hungary. The country's border with the West was finally reopened, and democracy was restored. Around this time, Ildiko graduated from high school and obtained her Hungarian esthetician's license. That same year, she started working for herself. She was following in her mother's footsteps, who, it appears, previously worked in the beauty industry as well. When Ildiko had just turned 20, she was already well on her way to forging a successful career path for herself and becoming well-versed in everything involved in running her own business. She also knew the importance of ongoing industry training, and she obtained a medical aesthetic certification as well as a bachelor's degree. The fall of communism across much of Central and Eastern Europe represented a huge shift in the opportunities available to young Hungarians like Ildiko. Until now, the possibility of exploring anything outside her home country was just a dream. But now, it seemed like it could become a reality. Ildiko had valuable trade skills, and she was a very determined young woman. She knew she could work anywhere and become successful, and she knew that she wanted to explore life outside of her home country. So, in 1992, the 23-year-old took a leap of faith. She not only wanted to go beyond Hungary, but outside of Europe. With one suitcase and just $50 in her possession, Ildiko decided to fly to California, United States. It must have been incredibly exciting, but also quite a daunting experience for Ildiko. leaving her tight-knit community and family for an entirely new country and language. The first thing she needed to do was begin working. After arriving in the United States, Ildiko took care of the necessary steps to live and work in California, and she ultimately became the lead esthetician at the spa at the luxurious Newport Coast Marriott Hotel. After obtaining her California cosmetology license, she knew she only had herself to rely on. She worked very hard to establish herself as a sought-out professional through her clientele and by making social connections. Creating a new social circle was actually pretty easy for someone like Ildiko. Her friendly, charismatic personality and caring nature just seemed to pull people into her orbit. It was no doubt that these qualities also attracted her future husband, a man named Ranilo Vestal, who was only a couple of years older than Ildiko. They just adored one another. Everyone that knew the couple could see the warmth and the love between them, and they also thought they made a pretty cute-looking couple as well, and they got along so nicely together. Around 1996 is when Ildiko and Ranilo tied the knot. By this time, Ildiko had also convinced her cousin, Eva Boni, to come join her in the United States. When Eva immigrated and settled in California, the pair continued building their close, caring relationship. Ildiko called her cousin every single day to check in on her and always wanted to take Eva to explore new places and do things together. By this time, 27-year-old Ildiko had sadly lost her father just 2 years earlier. Her brother, Laszlo, and her mom, Juliana, remained behind in Hungary. Her brother had his own life and his own family, but Ildiko's mother was now all alone, and that did not sit right with her. She wanted to show her mom how great life could be with her in the United States. The pair were so close, so Ildiko helped Juliana immigrate from Hungary to the US, and she was committed to looking after her the best she could. This way, Juliana could also see Ildiko's future children grow up and enjoy the same warm and loving dynamic with her daughter and son-in-law that Ildiko remembered so well from her own childhood. It gave the mother and daughter great comfort to know that if anything were to happen to Juliana, Ildiko and Ranilo were right there and could take care of everything. Juliana did have some health issues, so it gave everyone greater peace of mind knowing Ildiko could quickly arrange to take her mom to appointments and checkups. In 1998, Ildiko and Ranilo welcomed their son, Keanu, into the world. Ildiko was instantly more in love than she could have ever imagined. She absolutely adored her son, and there was nothing she wouldn't do for him. Everything was coming together for Ildiko and her little family in her adopted country. She was determined to work even harder so she could get her son to go to a private school, which she eventually did. While Ildiko's family was her #1 priority, professionally, she was also thriving. Her natural affinity for people, her sweet, charming nature, and her light-hearted sense of humor, combined with her ambition, intelligence, passion, and strong work ethic, made her highly sought after as an esthetician. Her warm and gentle manner in treating her clients' concerns meant that she developed a loyal client base who wouldn't dream of seeing anyone else. She would even go to her clients' birthdays, baby showers, and weddings. Just like she had in Hungary in 2002, Ildiko finally opened her very own day spa called Magyar Kozmetika. And if you're wondering, this literally translates to Hungarian cosmetics. They provided all kinds of aesthetic services, from facials, lash extensions, massages, waxing, and so much more. On Yelp, Ildiko wrote that the spa believed in using only the highest quality products and cutting-edge technologies to deliver holistically healing treatments that would leave every client feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. The spa had a 5-star rating on Yelp, with so many amazing reviews about Ildiko herself. One review I saw said, "From the moment you meet Ildiko, you know that you're in the presence of a woman who has finally honed her skill over the years. Her private practice is a luxurious experience. I look forward to weekly for my facial treatments and my eyelash extensions." Another client said they didn't even want to leave a review because they didn't want to share Ildiko with anyone else. The spa was located in a commercial space in Southern California, in Aliso Viejo. It's about 7 miles from Laguna Beach and about 50 miles southeast of Los Angeles. It's in Orange County, and it's a quiet place to live compared to the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles. It attracts families and young professionals who are looking for a bit of a slower pace with all the benefits of the California lifestyle. It's also just 6 miles from where Ildiko and her family moved in 2005, in the Wagon Wheel neighborhood in the community of Trabuco Canyon. Ildiko, her husband, her mother, and her son lived in a 2,000 square foot, 2-story, 4-bedroom home. It's in a very nice area. Ildiko was truly living the American dream. Of course, performing treatments and providing exceptional customer service weren't Ildiko's only responsibilities as an esthetician. To maintain her level of success, she had to stay at the top of her industry and keep up with all the developments and technology. She also had to be an effective marketer with product knowledge of multiple ranges that were second to none. Ildiko was such a go-getter that she eventually established a separate part of her day spa business, selling cosmetics. Working in an industry where appearances matter, Ildiko was also a walking advertisement for her skills and high-quality services. She was effortlessly stylish, always impeccably groomed, looking glamorous, and much younger than her age. In 2003, she updated her qualifications yet again and obtained an international medical aesthetic certification. She also taught others as an aesthetic educator, holding positions at luxury skincare companies such as Pavonia International, as well as Yonka Paris, a luxury French skincare line. She found her calling, and she had this innate ability to quickly connect with people, which made them want to be around her. And that's why she was so successful in business. She was authentic and genuinely cared about her clients, which generated repeat business. Ildiko was widely respected and well known as being a good listener who maintained her clients' confidence. She was compared to a hairstylist that you tell all your secrets to during every appointment. She was more than just someone providing a service. She was a truly remarkable woman and a great friend to everyone who knew and loved her, even to people back home. Whenever she would go back to Hungary, she would always bring souvenirs for everyone in her life, even if that meant picking out 30 different knickknacks to bring with her. She wanted everyone to know that they were loved. Another one of Ildiko's biggest passions was traveling, which she regularly did, usually back to Europe to attend industry training events and conferences to grow her skills as well as her business. But she also liked to travel for pleasure. In addition to her trips back to Europe and Hungary to see her brother, Laszlo, and his family, Ildiko thoroughly enjoyed discovering more of North America, as well as heading off to places like Mexico, Cuba, and Thailand. In mid-2016, Ildiko's son, Keanu, was off to college at Washington State University, and she could not have been prouder. Her son played the tuba in the college's marching band, which performed at the Washington Huskies football games, and Ildiko was thrilled to attend one of these games in Seattle to see her son in action. Another highlight for the family was in late 2017, when Ildiko treated her mom, Juliana, and her mother-in-law, Purita, to tickets to the filming of the TV show, The Price is Right. By 2018, things were really busy for Ildiko. By now, she had relocated her day spa after the building she originally rented from was sold. She moved to a corner suite on the bottom level of a 2-story, 11,000 square foot, red brick commercial building at 11 Mareblu. It was still located in Aliso Viejo and a little bit closer to her home, only a 15-minute drive. The complex housed multiple businesses, including a chiropractor, a massage therapist, and mostly medical offices. Palm trees and manicured lawns lined the side of the building where the day spa was situated, and clients enjoyed a sunny view outside the tinted windows. In March of 2018, Ildiko was off to Portugal for some R&R, and then in April, her brother Laszlo arrived in the United States for a vacation and to spend some quality time with his sister and her family. They enjoyed the sights and spectacular weather, and he helped out with some business advice as well as spending time in California. Ildiko and Laszlo actually went to Seattle to visit Keanu, and then they partied in Las Vegas together. The siblings had a fantastic time and treasured the memories they made, indulging in everything from lavish meals to even getting mani-pedis together. But soon, it was time for Laszlo to return home, and Ildiko was still caring for her mom, Juliana, who, by now, sadly was suffering from dementia. Luckily, Ronio did such a great job caring for his mother-in-law, He was always there to step in and help out when Ildiko was working or getting some much-needed time away. On May 5th, Ildiko headed back to Hungary, but this time she was visiting on business. She was excited to be bringing new high-tech facial treatments back to her day spa in California, which she knew would give her clients amazing results. When she arrived back in the US about a week later, she couldn't wait to get back to work and see not only her family, but also her clients, because she really missed them. But everything changed on May 15th, 2018. Just after 1 p.m. a 911 call came in about an apparent fire, an impossible explosion, at a commercial building where Ildiko's spa was located. Emergency personnel rushed to the scene. The building was smoldering, and gray smoke was rising from inside what was left of a portion of the corner area facing the roadway of Mareblu. When firefighters arrived, their immediate priority was evacuating not just the commercial building that was smoking, but also the surrounding buildings, including a childcare center located just across the street. More than 100 scared and confused toddlers were holding hands as childcare staff and firefighters guided them to the designated safe area while authorities moved in. There were even babies still inside their cribs that had to be wheeled out to safety as part of precautionary measures. No one knew exactly what happened, but many nearby heard the blasts that sent plumes of smoke, as well as debris flying through the air. Some thought it was fireworks. Others imagined maybe a pipe had burst or there'd been some kind of gas leak that went undetected until it blew up. It was easy to see that a portion of the building had been demolished. Shattered tinted glass was lying on the grass out front. You could see pink insulation hanging from what was left of the corner of the structure. And peering inside broken windows, it was evident the interior was blown apart. Tons of debris littered the inside and outside of the building. This once quiet area was full of chaos in just minutes. People fleeing the building were scared. They didn't know what was happening or if they should expect yet another blast. Andrew Dijak, who owned a massage business inside the building, ran out and saw windows and doors completely shattered. Glass was everywhere, and a small fire was burning. Piercing car alarms from surrounding vehicles were immediately set off in a high-pitched chorus as acrid smoke filled the air and debris scattered throughout the adjacent parking lot. The force of the blast shook the neighborhood as terrified residents and workers wondered if an earthquake had just struck. People working in the surrounding buildings were coming out to see what happened. Many of them grabbed their cell phones and took videos and pictures before emergency vehicles had even arrived on the scene. Once firefighters were able to clear the area, many other units arrived. Police, a bomb squad, ambulances, all trying to understand what had happened here. The media was, of course, on the scene as well, interviewing people who had heard or seen something. One gentleman had this to say about what he experienced that afternoon. "I heard a loud boom noise, along with a jolt. Not a jolt, but a ground shaking, and it jolted me to the wall, so I kind of banged my head against the wall. A lot of people were just running around, losing their minds, saying, 'Oh my goodness, what's going on? Where's this person? Where's that person?' Parents of the children who were at the daycare across the street were frantically trying to be reunited with their kids. Here's what one mother had to say. 'It is very nerve-wracking. I think I went into tears, so I'm just glad they're safe.' I can only imagine how worried these poor parents were, hearing that some kind of bomb or explosion went off so close by. They were so lucky." Chiropractor Chris Kennedy, who also had an office inside the building, wasn't there when devastation hit, but his suite was entirely destroyed. Walls and ceilings had caved in right where the employees were sitting. Luckily, none of them were injured, and they were able to evacuate safely. But others weren't so lucky. As EMTs and medical personnel came to the building, it was apparent that there were people who had been severely injured and maybe even killed. They came upon the horrific sight of severed human limbs and debris still burning outside in the parking lot. Good Samaritans had gathered around two injured women, a mother and daughter who were lying on the ground, and another victim had suffered from smoke inhalation and was being treated by medics. The two women, whose names were never released in the media, so I'm going to refer to them as Lena and Ellie, had managed to stumble to safety through a massive hole in the brick wall despite suffering significant burns and lacerations. They were both covered in blood and ash, with glass stuck to their bodies and singed hair. Parts of their skin were peeling off. They were rushed to a nearby hospital, where they had to undergo emergency surgery, but they were expected to survive. First responders, personnel from the fire department, and the Orange County Sheriff's Department had no idea what caused the damage or if anyone was still inside. If they were, what the extent of their injuries would be. As they carefully entered the building to investigate, there was still no sign of Ildiko. Meanwhile, it was only a matter of time before the news broke. Many people were texting friends and family to let them know what happened. A friend of Ildiko's named Holly Salcido lived only a mile or so away from the building, and she was on her lunch break when she actually heard the blast. Friends and coworkers began texting her, saying that a building on Mareblu had exploded, and her first thought was of Ildiko. She knew her spa was on that road, and she hoped she was okay. She texted her, but she didn't get an answer. Another person who thought of Ildiko when she heard the news was Sarah Thomas. She had just been at Ildiko's spa that morning, getting her lashes done, and now she was seeing it on the news, thinking, "Oh my God, a gas explosion happened after I left." She quickly texted Ildiko to see if she was okay. Sarah couldn't believe that she had just been there, and she hoped Ildiko would get out safely if she had been in the building when the blast occurred. It just seemed so unbelievable. Hearing the news, Ildiko's husband of 22 years, Ronilo, rushed to the scene, desperate to find out if his wife had been at work, but investigators told him they couldn't tell him anything at that stage. A woman named Valerie Stone was at work when she heard the news, and she immediately thought of her boyfriend, Stephen Beal. Although he didn't physically work at Ildiko's med spa, he was one of the people who helped invest in the company and acted as one of the partners. She called him, and when he answered, he was of course shocked by what she was telling him. Stephen wasted no time after finding out. He texted Ildiko in a panic, saying, "There's been an explosion there, are you okay?" But he, too, got no answer. Another friend of Ildiko's, named Scott Mullally, drove up to find pure chaos. He was supposed to be meeting Ildiko for lunch, and now he couldn't see her anywhere. The spa was reduced to rubble. As many agencies began arriving to assess the situation, a growing number of emergency vehicles were now blocking the street. There were 2 holes in the wall where Ildiko's spa had been. As first responders entered, they soon realized that at least one person had not survived. They discovered human remains outside of a broken window, as well as in the parking lot. Remember, I had mentioned severed limbs. It is just unreal. Someone hadn't made it, and that someone wasn't identified or announced for some time since. As you can imagine, it's not a very easy task. But eventually it was confirmed that the one and only fatality had been 48-year-old Ildiko Krajnyak. You can only imagine what happens to someone who is in an explosion. But nothing was given to the media at this point. Initially, some suspected maybe a car had crashed into the building. But when it became apparent it was an explosion, people started wondering if this was a tragic accident like a gas leak, or if it was something more sinister. One of those people was Officer Jack Ackerman. He knew that in March of that same year in Texas, there were bombs being sent all over, causing the same outcome, and he wondered if this could be some kind of copycat crime. Special Agent Ashley Miracle was sent to the hospital to get statements from the surviving victims, and Lead Agent Nick Vicencia was sent to the scene. There was a huge debris field that was going to have to be picked apart piece by piece to find the source of the explosion. Time was of the essence because they knew they probably had a bomber on the loose. This didn't appear to be an accident. It was apparent that the amount of damage was extensive. After the building was cleared for secondary explosive devices, officers located the origin, or what's called the seat of the explosion, which had been near the front counter of Ildiko's med spa. The ceiling was blown open and the floor of the building above had buckled. What law enforcement did right away was establish a command post and a dedicated tip line. One of the people to call in was Stephen, who I mentioned earlier. He's a 59-year-old who lives in Long Beach, and he told law enforcement that he was one of the co-owners and partners of Ildiko's spa. He had been alerted to the explosion by his girlfriend, Valerie, and he wanted to know if Ildiko was okay and what happened. He said he texted her at 3:15 p.m. that afternoon, but got no answer. While Orange County Sheriff's investigator Jack Ackerman and the FBI who were assisting in this case thought Ildiko's spa could have been the target, that meant anyone connected to her or the business could be at risk. Law enforcement knew there could be a possibility that a bomb may have been sent or placed at Stephen's home as well. Bomb technicians, including Deputy Stedman and FBI Task Force Officer Hickey, rushed to Stephen's Long Beach home at 7103 East El Paso Street. This is a little over 30 miles from the spa. They wanted to assess if he was at risk. Once they arrived, they told him to get out of the house. They saw there were a number of deliveries at his doorstep, and one of them could be deadly. So they placed Stephen in safety in a patrol car nearby, as bomb experts were given permission to examine the packages. Luckily, after a search of the contents of the packages, it was just things that Stephen had ordered as part of a home renovation he was working on. They still wanted to ask Stephen questions about Ildiko, because she could have been the main target. Of course, they did have to share the news of her death, and Stephen could not believe it. He also said he couldn't think of one person who would want to harm her. He described her as always smiling, someone who had great advice for people she cared about. She went out of her way to ease others' burdens. Many more of Ildiko's close friends and family would also receive the news of her death and have investigators knocking on their doors for information. Under Sheriff Don Barnes from the Orange County Sheriff's Office held a press conference the following day, on May 16th, with an update. It was still a fluid investigation, but he listened to everything that had already been done and how many different agencies were working on this case. He said, "When we arrived, we found one victim deceased at the scene, and we found 2 additional victims injured during that explosion. The injured victims are recovering at a hospital. They're currently undergoing surgery and are expected to survive. A third victim, who suffered from smoke inhalation at the scene, was treated by Orange County Fire Authority and released." The first priority of the Orange County Sheriff's Department and the Orange County Fire Authority was to render the scene safe. We worked in a unified command with the Fire Authority and were able to do that in very short order. Orange County Fire Authority brought more than 70 firefighters, which included paramedics, hazardous materials specialists, urban search and rescue, arson investigators, and the Joint Hazard Assessment Team, known as JHAT, to manage the incident. The Orange County Sheriff's Department dedicated numerous resources, including our initial patrol response, our critical incident response management team, our critical incident response team, our bomb squad, tactical teams, and the Orange County Intelligence Assessment Center, which worked to monitor the incident, mobile field force, and numerous investigative resources. So over 100 people from many different agencies were there assisting in search and rescue, and of course investigating what caused this to occur. The sheriff explained what they did when they got on the scene. "We immediately began to evacuate the surrounding businesses, including a preschool with more than 100 children. We also like to thank those from the adjacent businesses and the preschool for their cooperation, the ability to evacuate promptly, and their subsequent reunification efforts that took place." The Orange County Bomb Squad and Orange County Fire Authority's Hazardous Materials Team worked jointly to ensure there were no items that would cause a secondary explosion. The Hazardous Materials Team from the Orange County Fire Authority remains on the scene to assist as part of this investigation. At that time, they eliminated the possibility of another threat in that area. The deputy went on to explain what an extensive investigation this was and how fast things could change. He said, "We also called in our federal law enforcement partners from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and other federal agencies to assist in the investigation. I'd like to remind you that while we're still in the preliminary stages of the investigation, as you can imagine, this is a fluid situation. I will share with you what we believe to be true at this time, but as we've seen throughout the course of investigations like this, information changes rapidly." Working jointly, once the scene was declared safe, they began a full investigation into the cause of the explosion. The sheriff was about to give the public their theory on who was targeted and how the explosion occurred. I want you to know what happened with the two surviving victims, Lena and Ellie, who they were, as well as the timeline of what they knew before the incident occurred. When the agent went to the hospital to interview the mother and daughter, she found out that they had been inside the spa when the explosion occurred. On May 15, 2018, 48-year-old Ildiko returned to work. The spa had been closed while she was away, so, like many business owners, she had a lot to catch up on, and she had to tend to all sorts of tasks in between treating clients. That morning, her friend and client, Sarah Thomas, whom I told you about earlier, came in for an appointment to have her lashes done. They caught up on all the gossip from Ildiko's trip, and then Sarah left. Next to come in were Lena and Ellie, who were regulars and also Hungarian, like Ildiko. When the women were all finished up around 1 p.m., Lena was paying for their treatments at the front counter, while Ellie went to get something to drink. Lena noticed Ildiko pick up a cardboard box that had been sitting next to the counter, along with a pile of mail and several other boxes. Ildiko set the box on the counter and began using a tool to open it, like you would with a letter opener. Suddenly, the next thing Lena recalls was a bright light, and then the spa exploded. Windows and doors were blown out throughout the bottom level of the building, and then there was just chaos. The spa was immediately plunged into darkness as the sound of smashing glass and plumes of smoke and dust filled the air. Neither woman recalled anyone else being in the spa that morning besides Ildiko. Now, there were other practitioners that worked there, but since Ildiko had just returned from her trip, it appeared as though she was just getting back in. On that Tuesday, Lena had a very clear recollection of the appearance of the box that she recalled Ildiko opening just before the explosion. She said it was a rectangular box, like a shoebox, but not very wide. She also remembered an incredibly bright hot flash of light when Ildiko opened the package, followed by a loud boom and a massive wave of heat and pressure, which she said blew her backward onto the floor, causing flames and black smoke. Ellie actually had to dig her mother out of the rubble and pull her to safety. Sadly, one of Lena's eyes could not be saved due to a shrapnel injury. The women were grateful to be alive. Now, Ellie did not see Ildiko open the package, but she felt and heard the explosion and was knocked to the ground. Ellie described seeing everything on fire following the explosion. The mother and daughter managed to find each other in the smoke, dust, and darkness, and they exited the building, waiting for help to arrive. However, Lena did not see what happened to Ildiko. As the minutes and then hours passed, it was looking more and more like the 48-year-old mom, wife, and business owner was the target. She had been killed less than a month before her 49th birthday, but investigators held back on publicly releasing this information at this stage. However, those close to Ildiko had a feeling. Her friend Holly noticed that all of her texts were green instead of blue. That was one of the first signs that Ildiko had not made it. The explosion occurred at approximately 1:05 p.m., and here are some still frames from the chiropractic center surveillance video at 1:42 p.m. As first responders arrived inside, you could see them enter the door. There was the caved-in ceiling, blown-out walls, and debris. Now, let's listen to what else the Undersheriff Barnes told the public the following day. We believe that a business on the first floor of 11 Mareblu, our female victim, was killed by an explosion that occurred within that office. The business operates as a day spa. Evidence collected and what we believe are involved in the explosion are not consistent with items that would be used at a day spa. We do not believe at this time that this was an accident. At this time, we have ruled out the potential for this to be an accident. As I said, due to the condition of the victim, we are still working to officially identify her through the Orange County Coroner's Office, RIDE. However, based on our investigation, we believe the victim is Ildiko Krajnyak, 40 years old, from Trabuco Canyon. Ildiko is believed to be the owner of the day spa. 3 search warrants were served earlier this morning. At this time, there are no arrests. In regard to this investigation, investigators are still working to confirm whether or not this was an intentional act. We are, however, investigating this as a crime, and Sheriff's Homicide is the lead investigator in this case. So there you have it. The items that they had collected and the information they gathered showed that they don't think this is an accident. The items were not from the spa, since we were told by Lena that Ildiko was opening what looked like a package, like mail. The officer also preliminarily announced that Ildiko was the single fatality. Though the explosion didn't appear to be an accident, any larger threats to the community had been ruled out. The motive wasn't clear, but terrorism had also been eliminated. As they continued to investigate, they realized that if a device had exploded, it would be challenging to recover every single component of something so destructive, and it was going to take time. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force was immediately called in to assist. Lead Agent Nick Vicencia, along with Special Agents Ashley Miracle, Chris Denning, Matt Jemenko, and FBI Task Force Officer Rob Warren, were assigned to this case. They would be assisting the Orange County Sheriff's Department, which was leading this investigation. As the undersheriff explained to the public, the hazmat team was there, along with agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the Department of Homeland Security. Meanwhile, investigators continued talking to Ildiko's family and friends, and one thing stood out right away: Ildiko's relationship with her husband. They learned that although Ildiko and Ranilo had lived together, they had been going through a separation. Friends and Ildiko's cousin, Ava, explained that the couple was in love, but as the years wore on, they grew apart. Ranilo was great, and Ildiko loved him and cared about him. He also cared deeply about Ildiko and her mother, Juliana. He took really good care of her. However, over time, they realized they were looking for different things in life. For the last couple of years at least, Ildiko had been dating other men, and Ranilo was aware of this. They did have some kind of arrangement between the two of them. It was personal, and no one knew the exact details because that was their private business. Ildiko did not like sharing information about her relationship with her husband, but on the other hand, she didn't mind sharing things about her other love interests. Holly said that she knew Ildiko had at least 5 or 6 other men over the last few years. That was important. Could one of them be involved in this explosion? Ildiko's client, Sarah, who was at the spa the morning the blast occurred, said that Ildiko had shared her excitement about a more recent guy that she had been seeing out in Sacramento. She mentioned wanting to get more serious with him. Investigators wondered if Ranilo was upset about this, especially after he had driven to the spa. Upon learning about the explosion from his brother and getting no response from Ildiko after texting her, he drove straight home, as the police instructed him to do. But unbeknownst to Ranilo, they were watching him. They soon arrived with a search warrant for the home, and this search was extensive. It went through the evening and into the next morning. Despite boxes and boxes of items seized from the home, ultimately, nothing in the residence or about Ranilo's demeanor led authorities to believe that he was some kind of vengeful husband. He was genuinely distressed that the mother of his child, who he had a deep respect and love for, had been brutally killed. Now up in Washington, Keanu had initially received a concerning message from one of Ildiko's friends, asking if Ildiko had returned from Hungary and if she was okay. They said that something bad had happened. Keanu had no idea because he didn't speak to his mom that much, now that he was away at college. But he did a quick internet search, which initially revealed that a car had crashed into the building where the spa was located. So Keanu immediately tried to contact his mom that day, but there was no response. As he was frantically refreshing the internet search, the news got worse. He found out it wasn't a car that had crashed into the building. The articles were now saying that there had been some sort of explosion. Keanu was not able to get through when he tried calling the Orange County Sheriff's Office, so he began contacting every hospital in the area, but his mom was not admitted to any of them. How sad is that for a son to be trying to find out information from the internet and not knowing what was going on? When Keanu was eventually told by the FBI that the person who had been killed was his mother, his world felt like it stopped. He couldn't breathe. He wondered, how could this have happened? He couldn't even reach his father or his grandma because the FBI had seized every device in their home. To make things worse, TV news trucks lined the street outside the family home, capturing every detail of the search of the family. They weren't allowing Ranilo and Juliana to grieve in peace. They were violating their privacy at such a traumatic time. Thankfully, Ildiko's son, Keanu, who had been in the middle of studying for his finals at college, quickly made it home to be with his grieving family just days after his mother was killed. He bravely faced the media, and here's what he had to say. "There's just so many things that we don't know yet, and there's so many unknown things. It's just also sudden that a lot of this is still very raw." He did not get to say goodbye. He was out of state, and now left with this reality back home. With his father by his side, Keanu fought back tears as he told the reporters, "I just really want to express the amount of gratitude that I have for the overwhelming support that everyone has been giving my family. Obviously, this is a really hard thing for everyone to process. There's still a lot of unknown things. Personally, I would like to express my thanks for all the support people gave, especially to the GoFundMe page for all the arrangements and getting me back here from college early. There's so many things we don't know yet. It's just all so sudden. A lot of this is still very raw and still really hard to process for everybody. I want to express my gratitude for all the love and support that I've gotten from everybody. It's just been a lot." End quote. Then, Ildiko's cousin Eva stood next to a family friend, Irene White, who wrote a prepared statement on behalf of the family, saying, "This is a complete shock to family and friends. We're in full support of our public authorities to do their jobs in hopes of finding answers to many of the unanswered questions." Family always came first for Ildiko. She took great pride in finding beauty in everyone. "At this time, our family and friends would like to privately mourn a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a friend." Irene concluded the statement by requesting that anyone wanting to help financially could consider donating to their GoFundMe that had been set up by Ildiko's neighbors. Not only were there now unexpected funeral expenses, but 20-year-old Keanu had to fly home as soon as possible to be with his family. On top of that, prior to her death, Ildiko had been making arrangements for her mother, Juliana, to return to Hungary, so those expenses were also up in the air. Ildiko's devastated neighbors tied ribbons in her favorite color, orange, up and down the street as a way to honor her and show support to her family. Back in Hungary, Ildiko's brother Laszlo learned the shocking news, not through a personal phone call but actually from the media. He could not believe what he was seeing and hearing. How could his beloved sister be dead? It really seemed like a bad dream, and I can't imagine, again, finding this out from the internet. The next step was for investigators to look into who Ildiko had been communicating with and her movements in the days before her death, as well as anyone who might have wanted to hurt her. Authorities searched every suite in the building on Mareblu, Ildiko's white Lexus, which had been in the parking lot at the spa, as well as her social media accounts, her phone records, and an iPhone that was found in the spa near the blast site. As it happened, a local sheriff's deputy had routinely checked the building at 15 Mareblu the night before the explosion, but nothing seemed out of place, and there was no suspicious activity. Unfortunately, the security cameras at 11 Mareblu were not working at the time of the explosion. Of course, they weren't. It's like they never work when you need them to. However, there did seem to be some outside cameras in the parking lot and the surrounding area that were being combed through. Since authorities knew that Ildiko had flown back into LAX following her most recent trip, law enforcement pulled security video from the airport. They wanted to see if Ildiko had arrived back in LA with anyone else. Interestingly, they saw her on surveillance talking and laughing at the baggage claim with a man. It wasn't her husband, of course, but that was to be expected. However, it didn't appear that this man had traveled with Ildiko because he didn't have a suitcase. So they wondered, who was he? They also pulled surveillance from a layover that Ildiko had at the San Francisco airport several hours before she boarded her flight to LAX. There was another man in that footage, and it appeared that man may have made his way home from there. The man at LAX met her at the baggage claim. This guy seemed to have possibly been traveling with her, or maybe he lived in that area. All investigators had at this point were these two men, two potential faces with no names. So investigators went back to interviewing friends of Ildiko. They were also looking at anyone connected to the spa and canvassing Ildiko's neighborhood, as well as Stevens, who was her co-owner out in Long Beach. That's when they got some interesting information. One of Stevens' neighbors was asked if he'd heard or seen anything suspicious in regard to Steven, and that's when the neighbor was like, "Oh, the guy who builds rockets." What did he mean? Build rockets? Kind of rockets? Well, the neighbor said they were tall rockets that Steven used to set off in the desert. Well, what do rockets need to get set off? They need a detonator. So that piqued the investigators' interest. Steven was forthcoming. He wanted to help however he could to find out what happened. So he agreed to let officers Stedman and Hickey get a search warrant for his property, where they found several items of interest in Steven's garage. These included 7-foot-tall rockets, rocket-making equipment, 2 containers of a precursor chemical called potassium perchlorate, 2 other containers of something called red gum, which is used as fuel and binder in fireworks, and at least 3 containers of black powder. It turned out that Steven was a rocket hobbyist. He'd been making rockets for years. It was something everyone who was close to him knew about. Steven was interviewed about these rockets by Sheriff's investigator Pelayo. He gave Pelayo a brief rundown of how he knew Ildiko and how he became involved in the spa. When asked how the two of them got into business together, considering Steven was clearly not an esthetician or stylist, Steven admitted that he and Ildiko had been acquainted a few years ago in 2016. They started as friends, but they did have a period where they were together romantically. They dated for about a year, and Steven was happy to help Ildiko start the spa. Steven signed the lease on Ildiko's new space at 11 Mareblu because she had apparently filed for bankruptcy in 2014, so her credit wasn't so good. Steven explained that his romance with Ildiko had fizzled out, and he started dating Valerie in April of 2018. But he and Ildiko remained very good friends and were still happily running the business together, though he wasn't actively involved. However, he explained it was pretty normal for him to stop by the day spa in his capacity as Ildiko's business manager. He would come in, see how things were going, check for mail, things like that. Steven voluntarily went down to the Orange County Sheriff's Department to speak with investigator Ackerman. The bombing had really rattled him, and he wanted to talk to law enforcement to see if they knew whether this was an accident or not and why the business or Ildiko had been targeted. As Steven talked further, he was a valuable source of information. Given his professional and even romantic link to Ildiko, he knew a lot about what was going on in the business and with her life. Apart from perhaps one person that he knew from Ildiko's past, who we are going to get to, he couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm her, given the nature of Steven and Ildiko's association and the fact that he made rockets. He knew the FBI and the ATF would need to formally search his home and his vehicle in order to eliminate him as a person of interest. So that's why he agreed for that to take place. During his interview, Steven talked about a range of things. He knew Ildiko was separated from her husband. He knew that she was seeing other men, including one out in Sacramento, and recalled that this was also mentioned by Sarah. Steven explained that he and Ildiko had taken a trip to Portland, Portugal, just prior to their breakup, and that's when he noticed a change in her behavior. Her phone and passwords, which she had previously shared with him, had been changed with no explanation. Steven always assumed that, while he knew Ildiko had seen other men in the past, he thought he was the only man she was currently dating. As far as he was concerned, they were exclusive, and he certainly wasn't dating anyone else. But he could tell things were not the same. When Steven did get the confirmation from Ildiko that she wasn't interested in being exclusive, he realized they were looking for different things. After all, Steven was 10 years older than Ildiko, and he wanted something more. For sure he understood, but of course, he wasn't thrilled that Ildiko had hidden these details about her other relationships, including this new man in Sacramento. He found this to be deceptive, and he felt betrayed. Things ended, and Steven moved on to dating Valerie. According to him and Valerie herself, things were going well for both of them. The last time he'd been at the spa was a couple of times when Ildiko was away to pick up a check to give to the building manager, but he hadn't noticed anything suspicious. Financially, things were working well. Steven paid the spa's $1,500 monthly rent, and half of its operating costs. If Ildiko was having a hard time 1 month with the business, Stephen would lend her money, and she would always pay it back later. Stephen told investigators that he used to work as an executive consultant, but he'd been on disability for some years now, due to receiving a diagnosis of something called aphasia. He said the cause was from a dose of lead poisoning. This is a disorder that causes difficulties with speech, language processing, and comprehension, even memory loss, and it can severely limit someone's ability to communicate. So he was laying low and helping where he could. At the spa, Stephen also told investigators about his hobbies, including rocket making. He was also big into acting. He had written a screenplay about a soccer mom moonlighting as an assassin. He even performed a magic trick for the officers who were interviewing him. He even said that what he was going through right now could be another creative project. The craziness of having his business partner potentially targeted by a bomber. That would make for some pretty good material. This could seem pretty heartless, but Stephen explained that there are a lot of potentially humorous anecdotes wrapped up in the most intense life situations, and audiences can relate to that. Stephen's nature was just that way. He was outgoing, he was talkative, and everybody grieves differently. But of course he also thought that some of these things could be red flags, so they moved to talking about Stephen's passion for making rockets, which was interesting given what the bomb squad had found in the search of his home. Stephen said he'd learned how to build advanced rockets from a friend, which he did until he gave up the hobby a long time ago. He said he hadn't been setting them off the way he used to for years, probably since about 2004. He wanted to clarify that, of course, rockets have explosive components. Stephen clarified that he never made bombs. The closest thing he made to something that could blow up was a small device for a neighbor to help him get rid of gophers. Stephen claimed he couldn't remember what he used for that device, apart from it having a long fuse. It was a while ago. When detectives asked Stephen if he had the skills or the know-how to create something as powerful as the device that had detonated at the spa, he was adamant that he did not. Due to the nature of that explosion, it would require a device that was way beyond his capabilities or whatever materials he might have left over at his home. Stephen told the officers he couldn't even remember what chemicals he had in his garage or when he had even used them last. It was that long ago. But he did take a guess at what sort of chemicals could be required to create an explosion like the one at the spa. Now he couldn't be sure because there were just so many possibilities. Professionals would know a lot more than he would, but he estimated any device would require what they call an oxidizer. This facilitates the fuel ignition element of the explosion. So Ackerman asked if there could have been an oxidizer in Stephen's garage, and he said he didn't know. He wasn't 100% sure. He explained that any chemicals at his home would have been ordered online between late 1992 and 2004, from the late 1990s until September 2001. He was also making fireworks, including mortars, but he said he stopped doing that after September 11th because he didn't want anyone to get the wrong impression. Well, I don't know the first thing about bombs, even fireworks, all that stuff scares me. But remember, in the search of Stephen's garage, there was a chemical called potassium perchlorate. Well, it turns out that this can be used as an oxidizer. It's actually used when you're manufacturing pyrotechnic powders, also called flash powders, both in commercial and improvised manufacturing. But they wondered, could it cause the amount of damage seen in the explosion at the spa? They weren't sure. They didn't have any reason or evidence to hold Stephen, so he left. After several hours of being interviewed, his demeanor had seemed kind of odd in the investigators' eyes. It was clear to investigator Ackerman that Stephen was intelligent and he loved to talk, especially about himself. Even though his romance had ended with Ildiko, he seemed perfectly at ease and relatively unaffected by her sudden death. I mean, yes, he does have a new girlfriend with whom he seems very happy. He did have 3 adult children and grandchildren, and he lived on his own. He appeared to be a perfectly content adult, even if he didn't seem overly distressed that his business partner had just been killed. What they didn't know at the time was that Stephen was familiar with heartache, grief, and sudden death. He was a widower. His wife of 29 years had passed away from pancreatitis back in 2008, even though it seemed like Stephen wasn't involved in anything that happened to Ildiko. Because the investigators were conducting a more thorough search of his home and of his 2017 Toyota Prius, authorities seized a bunch of items of interest, including 2 pipe-sized, completely improvised explosive devices known as IEDs. They also found e-matches, batteries, a 9-volt battery connector, and multiple cardboard and modified rocket tubes of various sizes. These latter items were components that could all be used in the construction of IEDs. Then they found 130 pounds, yes, pounds of chemicals and propellants, 80 pounds of which were in Stephen's garage, including that potassium perchlorate and potassium chlorate, as well as 2 handguns and a shotgun. When he was asked about the IEDs, Stephen said that he did not recognize them. However, he later acknowledged that one of these was a smoke detonator designed to release smoke during flight so that a rocket would stay visible, and that it wasn't anything nefarious. Bomb technicians had determined that the devices found in Stephen's garage could most definitely be used to create destructive devices. So on May 16th, just a day after the explosion, he was arrested by the FBI. He was charged with 1 count of possession of an unregistered destructive device. Now this was not in connection with Ildiko's death. The investigators were merely doing their job, and it proved illegal at the time for Stephen to be in possession of these items. He was denied bail by the U.S. District Court and held in custody due to being a flight risk and possibly a danger to the community. The quantity and nature of those chemicals in his garage were questionable, at the least. On May 16th, after Stephen was arrested, Ildiko was publicly identified as the victim of the bombing. The investigation had to go on. There were still so many unanswered questions. If the device had been contained in a package, it wasn't one that was delivered by UPS, FedEx, or any similar service because it would have been detected. However, police still didn't know who could have built the device, or the nature of the chemicals or the detonator used as a bomb. Technicians gathered evidence from the scene. Anything that appeared to be part of the device was bagged up and then taken to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, for further analysis. When I tell you how massive the search was, I mean just looking at the debris, you can see there are so many pieces of just all kinds of things. It's hard enough to sift through all those little pieces to determine what should be analyzed. As authorities continued their inquiries into Ildiko's life, they learned that Stephen and the man in Sacramento weren't the only ones that Ildiko dated outside of her marriage. What we do know is that law enforcement knew that her husband was not behind her death. But how much did he know about her other romantic interests and the men in her life outside their marriage? Well, Ranilo said not that much, but he did tell police that Ildiko's handyman was named Max. He did repairs and maintenance at the spa. He had a key, and for some unknown reason, he sometimes slept in his car out in the parking lot outside the business. He was looked into, but Max was quickly ruled out as having no involvement, so they had to move on. Now, Sarah had told investigators that prior to her appointment that day at the spa, she saw a man with gray hair. He was quite tall, and he was leaving Ildiko's office when she was coming in. She wondered if that could be the man from Sacramento that Ildiko kept talking about. She hadn't told Sarah that that was the guy. She didn't even introduce them. She just said they were friends. When investigators showed Sarah some of the grainy images from the airport, she couldn't recognize the man she'd seen, but police had identified him. The man at the building with the gray hair was Scott Mallory. He was the man who had a lunch date with Ildiko on the day of the bombing, and he was the same man who picked her up from LAX when she arrived home from Hungary after San Francisco. Scott said he did not know Ildiko very long. He had just met her a few weeks before that at a casino. In addition to picking her up, he also dropped her off at LAX when she flew to Europe and had driven her to the spa for her first day back at work. He didn't seem to have a motivation to harm Ildiko, but investigators checked him out and executed search warrants anyway. Law enforcement had also tracked down the man they saw in the San Francisco airport. His name was Laszlo Rabo. Not to be confused with her brother, they both have the same name. He told investigators he had traveled to Hungary with Ildiko, and they had been casually dating in the months leading up to that trip. He lived in Sacramento, and he was able to prove that he was nowhere near the spa on the day of the explosion. They were just ruling these men out one by one. A decision was finally made by Ildiko's family that her funeral would be held back in Hungary. But her many friends, an expansive social network that she had created for herself in California over the years, wanted to pay their respects and say farewell to this incredible woman they had known and loved. So, on May 25th, a memorial service was held at the San Francisco Solano Church in Rancho Santa Margarita. Meanwhile, FBI bomb technicians in Virginia continued analyzing the 300 pieces of evidence from the site of the wreckage. It was incredibly time-consuming. There were these tiny pieces spread across an 80 to 90-foot area. Then, 10 days after the explosion, near the location that they believed to be the blast seat where it began, firefighters recovered significant remnants of the bomb's components. This included the outer covering of the CV's store-branded 9-volt battery. It had been completely ripped open. The force of the explosion was so powerful that the inner cells from the battery were lodged in the ceiling. A cell phone was also found, as well as melted material that appeared to be duct tape and loose wires. Like the battery, these items were extremely damaged. As the painstaking work continued, these technicians deduced what type of device had killed Ildiko. It had been concealed inside that cardboard box, and it was something called a flash powder bomb. The mechanism to set the device off was tripped when the box was opened and was powered by that 9-volt battery. It was clear that whoever had built this device was in no way a beginner. Even though the various components were still something that someone could buy over the counter at any retail store, it was constructed by someone with sophisticated knowledge of how these things worked, including the combination of electric fusing systems and chemicals. At the same time, investigators had been analyzing terabytes worth of financial records, security footage, phone records, and data and online activity by Ildiko. They also spoke to her husband again, and he had some more information about someone who really hated Ildiko. And it wasn't a man, it was a woman. Remember, I said that Stephen had also mentioned someone that he knew didn't like Ildiko, and I said we would get to that later. Well, that's now. It turns out that back in 2015, Ildiko had a fling with a man named Gabor Pap, who lived not too far from the day spa. Gabor's wife, Elizabeth, was suspicious of her husband's impromptu outings and followed him one day. She caught him having sex with Ildiko at the spa. Gabor initially told Ildiko he was planning on leaving Elizabeth, but that wasn't exactly the case. So after this big blowout, Gabor stopped seeing Ildiko and stayed with his wife. Things seemed to be resolved until Ildiko reached out to Gabor 2 years after the dust had settled. In 2017, Elizabeth actually saw Ildiko driving past their home, and she decided she wouldn't be fooled. Twice, she contacted both Ildiko and Ronilo in an attempt to get Ildiko to back off. Elizabeth texted Ildiko these explicit photographs, which, by all accounts, appeared to depict Elizabeth and Gabor in a sexual manner. It was a way for Elizabeth to gloat to Ildiko about being the winner in this situation. Ronilo, on the other hand, received messages from Elizabeth demanding that he do something about his wife pursuing her husband. First, Elizabeth said, quote, "She almost destroyed my family. Enough is enough." But as recently as April 2018, which would have been just a month prior to the explosion, Elizabeth contacted Ronilo again, saying, quote, "Please ask your wife to stop contacting me or my husband. She did it again. Any contact from her is not welcome for us." When Ronilo suggested Elizabeth take some initiative by maybe blocking Ildiko on social media, Elizabeth was irate. She replied, "Really? You're so blind and accept what your wife is doing instead of stepping up. Be a man." But we know that there was an arrangement between Ildiko and Ronilo. It wasn't exactly his concern. Ildiko was apparently unfazed by Elizabeth's hatred. While Elizabeth seemed to have Ildiko in her crosshairs, Ildiko told her friends she wasn't even concerned about any risk to her safety. But that didn't matter. Investigators still called Gabor and Elizabeth in for interviews, and Elizabeth was open about how much she despised Ildiko. But the couple happily agreed for authorities to search their entire home and forensically analyze their cell phones. Even though Elizabeth had a motive, there was nothing to suggest that either she or her husband had the means or the capability to construct any kind of bomb, let alone one that would have killed Ildiko. Now, while all of this was going on, there was a surprising development. On May 26th, federal prosecutors just suddenly dropped the charges against Stephen. He was released. Authorities now admitted that, upon further examination of the IEDs, it wasn't clear whether they actually met the statutory definition for a destructive device under federal law. Therefore, Stephen was free to go. But, of course, investigators were still watching him like a hawk. However, publicly they were emphasizing they wouldn't be naming any suspects in the spa bombing until they had sufficient evidence to do so. Ildiko's loved ones were heartbroken, even though the charge hadn't even related in any way to her murder. All they saw was a man who could have been responsible and was getting away with something, and that made him more of a suspect in their eyes, especially Keanu. He had met Stephen once. It was during a family trip to Mexico the previous August. Well, he thought it was a family trip. It was incredibly upsetting when Keanu found out that instead of having quality time with his mom, his grandmother, and his uncle, he was actually going to be hanging out with his mom's boyfriend. He was really upset that Stephen had been invited. He wasn't a fan. So this made Stephen a potential suspect once again. Investigators knew they would find records of messages and calls between Stephen and Ildiko because they had this ongoing professional relationship, which is why it wasn't a surprise to find anxious text messages from Stephen to Ildiko, concerned that she would leave him. These were from early 2018, but the messages were a bit over the top, to say the least. When Ildiko asked Stephen for a little space, he threatened to take his own life. Yeah, so he wasn't taking it very well. It also didn't seem like things were exactly over either. Back in April, on April 22nd, after the breakup and after Stephen started dating Valerie, he texted Ildiko saying, "Building a relationship with you is the single most important period of my life. Ildiko, you rock my world. You are the woman that I've always dreamed of. I will love you forever." Days later, Ildiko texted Stephen back with, "Miss you. When do we get to cuddle?" And Stephen replied, "Miss you too. Love." So clearly both of them were still contacting one another on more than a business or friend level. Law enforcement also found photos on Stephen's phone from just before their breakup. They were taken on that vacation in Portugal. These were text messages that were exchanged between Ildiko and another man. Remember, Stephen said that he caught her being sketchy? Well, the texts were in Hungarian, not in English, and it wasn't immediately obvious what the pair were discussing. It turns out that the person Ildiko had been texting was that guy Laszlo in Sacramento. He was the man Ildiko had recently gone to Hungary with, and he was the one seen on that security footage at the San Francisco airport. Investigators quickly determined that Stephen had actually taken photos of these text exchanges so that he could have the messages translated. Clearly, Stephen wanted to know what Ildiko was discussing with this other man. Part of the text conversation involved Ildiko and Laszlo chatting about going dancing on their upcoming trip to Hungary. Well, we already know Stephen wasn't thrilled about Ildiko talking to another man, but this was all investigators had to go on at the moment. So they figured maybe they should do a background check on Stephen. Maybe that would either rule him out or confirm he had a motive to hurt Ildiko. So this is what they found. Stephen William Beal was born in 1959. He grew up in Long Beach, California with his family. He went on to obtain a business degree from Pepperdine University in 1978. By the time he met Ildiko, he had been a widower for 8 years, following the sudden and tragic death of his wife of 29 years and the mother of his 3 children, Christine. In February 2008, Stephen and his 48-year-old wife, Christine, had been moving a 49-pound end table down the stairs of their home. Christine was holding the lower end while Stephen was at the top. Suddenly, somehow, the couple lost their balance. Christine fell, and she was crushed under the weight of the table at the bottom of the staircase. Stephen had also fallen forward and ended up on top of this piece of furniture. After this freak accident, Christine didn't die immediately, but she was rushed to the hospital with critical hip and pelvis injuries. Over the next few weeks, she was in and out of the hospital for treatment from complications, and she ended up passing away in the ICU. Stephen was devastated. However, the hospital staff were concerned when Stephen decided to become uncooperative. He wasn't willing to provide information about Christine's medical history. He initially hadn't even told police that he was present when she fell. But Christine had told everyone after her fall that it was an accident. It was interesting to note that when Christine died, they found out in a toxicology report that she had a very high and unexplained concentration of lead in her body. Plus, it was revealed that just 6 weeks before this, Stephen had taken out an accidental death policy through his employer. Christine's autopsy report noted that her cause of death was pancreatitis, electrolyte imbalance, and other undetermined factors. Despite the manner of death being recorded by the coroner as undetermined, there was no evidence of foul play, and no charges were brought against Stephen in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Stephen later claimed Christine was poisoned due to their home's previous owner making fishing lures in the house. Recall that he too was on disability due to what he said was lead poisoning. Well, it emerged that 6 months before Christine's death, Stephen had purchased lead tetroxide, a chemical used as an orange-red pigment in paint designed for iron projects. I know this is a lot to take in. Is this a coincidence or something more? Christine's insurance company initially refused a payout in response to Stephen's claim for $21,000. The medical assessor noted that it was unlikely Christine had died solely by accident. In 2010, Stephen did ultimately win a $550,000 settlement after suing both his employer and the insurer, and received the money in March of 2011. Now, following Stephen's most recent arrest over the destructive device charge in May of 2018, the Long Beach Police Department decided to look back into Christine's death. But eventually, they concluded that they didn't find anything sinister that contributed to her passing. Investigators knew that Stephen had a professional background in management consulting, but he had been on disability for the past 10 years. He actually filed for bankruptcy in 2009, but this was discharged in 2015. There's absolutely no shame in being on disability. However, authorities found that it was very odd that Stephen was able to pursue his passion for acting. He uploaded a lot of audition reels to the internet. He invested a lot of money into acting classes. He'd even had some really minor parts in short films and movies. But I guess if you can't work due to medical reasons, it's important to have hobbies to fill your time and to make you feel fulfilled. To me, it pretty much looks like everyone here in LA, I think most of us have pursued acting at one point or another. But these videos were interesting because remember how I said the basis of Stephen's disability claim was his aphasia diagnosis? I told you it can cause severe communication difficulties. If his condition was so bad that he wasn't able to work, it's kind of difficult to see how he could possibly have been physically and cognitively able to pursue acting. Was Stephen fraudulently claiming disability by lying or exaggerating his symptoms? If so, this could be another way for law enforcement to charge him while they were still carrying out their investigation into the explosion. This was sort of buying them time, so to speak. As it so happened, investigators would get a chance to see Stephen in action on stage, and then they could determine how badly he was truly affected by the so-called aphasia. He was appearing in a local theater production of 12 Angry Jurors. It's a play off the movie 12 Angry Men, which is a crime thriller about a jury in New York City. It's a murder trial, and it's frustrating for all the jury members when a single member of the jury is skeptical, which forces them to carefully consider the evidence before making a decision. It's a very popular film. The FBI went along to see Stephen perform in this play, and while he wasn't going to be winning any Academy Awards anytime soon, he gave a very competent and entertaining performance. But was he a murderer? They couldn't prove that. Orange County Sheriff's Department Commander William Baker continued to urge the public to come forward if they had any knowledge of anything suspicious that could be linked to this bombing. We hear it all the time. Even the smallest or most insignificant piece of information can hold the key to a conviction. Investigators started combing through Stephen's financial records, and based on what they found at the crime scene, they worked really hard to find out if any of the components of the bomb could be linked to places in the local area that sold these items, which may have been purchased in the lead-up to Ildiko's murder. Detectives knew that the 9-volt battery had come from a CVS store, remember? But which one? When authorities learned that Stephen withdrew some cash from a local ATM about a week before the bombing, one officer realized that the bank was right down the street from a CVS. When he pulled the store's security footage, guess what? There was Stephen. He was buying a 9-volt battery with cash on May 8th. That was just days before the bomb went off. They went to a Staples store close by to the spa, and again he was seen on camera. This time, guess what he was purchasing? A 12x6 cardboard box. That cannot be a coincidence. The investigators didn't think so either. It was strikingly similar to the one that Lena had described seeing Ildiko open before the explosion. To be sure they were dealing with the same battery, investigators traced the one in the device to a shipment that arrived from China to the United States and was delivered to the CVS store, where Stephen was seen buying it. The last piece of the puzzle was eliminating every other individual who had purchased a 9-volt battery from CVS with the same serial number. Law enforcement was able to do this. Even though the wiring used in the device didn't appear to have been purchased by Stephen in the lead-up to the bombing, there were no meaningful differences between what they found and any of the previous wiring found in Stephen's garage. It could have been left over from rocket making. The footage taken from the cameras nearby the spa was also combed through. Finally, a clip from May 11th showed a vehicle resembling Stephen's Prius driving into the parking lot a block away from the spa and then pulling away not long afterward. But still, Stephen admitted to entering the premises while Ildiko was away. But why did he have to park far away from the building and kind of creep up? Of course, though, they needed more. Special agents covertly approached Stephen. Now Valerie, they needed her help. If Stephen could confess to anyone, it would probably be her. The agent showed her pictures of the aftermath and the images they had of Stephen purchasing the battery in the box. Would she agree to wear a wire and get Stephen to confess on tape? They were hoping so. At first, Valerie did not want to even entertain the idea that her fiancé was a murderer, but she knew Ildiko's family needed answers. If Stephen admitted to killing his ex, then she would have to deal with the fallout. And of course, why would you want to be with him if he did? By this time, law enforcement knew that Stephen wasn't as trusting or as unbothered by Ildiko's social life, and he lied to investigators about that. Ildiko's good friend Holly had told officers that one evening, when she was at dinner with Ildiko, Stephen got it in his head that Ildiko was cheating on him. He started texting Ildiko again and again and calling her. Then he came to the restaurant where they were eating dinner. It was obvious he was jealous and suspicious of what was going on. Other friends of Ildiko did not know Stephen's name, but they recognized him from photographs as someone Ildiko said she was scared of. She confided in her friends that she was scared he would stalk her and could seriously harm her, someone who was possessive and controlling. But even though this behavior is out of line, it didn't make Stephen a murderer, but it definitely contradicted the image he painted of himself that he'd given to investigators. This is why law enforcement was relying on Valerie. She and Stephen had a weekend getaway planned in Mareblu, so the FBI struck a deal with her. They would pick up the tab for their accommodations if Valerie agreed to wear a wire. They also wanted to put a recording device in her car, bug her cell phone, and their room. There were 25 agents listening in the entire weekend. But to her surprise, whenever she brought up the subject of the bombing and Ildiko's death, Stephen didn't react at all. There was no emotional breakdown, no angry outbursts questioning why Valerie was raising such awful questions on their pleasant weekend away. Nothing about Stephen's reaction to Valerie discussing the bombing raised any concern. Unfortunately for Ildiko's family, the answers would come too late for her beloved mother, Juliana. In September of 2018, less than 6 months after losing her daughter, the 77-year-old passed away. From what we can tell, it appears that a joint funeral was held for her mother and daughter back in Hungary on October 26th, with Ildiko's brother expressing his profound thanks and sorrow on his social media account. Despite that sting operation not going the way the FBI had hoped, they weren't exactly back at square one. There were now too many things that made it impossible for Stephen not to be their guy. especially the way he voluntarily inserted himself into this case. Just days after the explosion, he did 10 hours of interviews on 3 separate occasions. It was clear to police that he was trying to determine early on what the investigators knew, and he also wanted to show them how smart he was. But if Stephen thought that putting himself in the sights of the authorities would make them cross him off the list, it didn't work. Instead, it firmly planted him in their minds as someone whose potential level of involvement warranted more attention, not less. The totality of the evidence made the case against Stephen compelling. The whole was greater than the sum of its parts. There he was on camera, buying not only a similar type of box used in the explosion, but the same battery from CVS. He had the know-how and the access to the chemicals required to build the same device. Despite his claims, he hadn't moved on from Ildiko at all. His text messages and his behavior showed what he was really like. On March 3, 2019, a month shy of the first anniversary of Ildiko's death, Stephen Beal was arrested again and held without bond. This time, it was for malicious destruction of a building, resulting in death. This new federal charge potentially carried a death sentence or life in prison without the possibility of parole. After conducting another search of Stephen's home and his vehicle, it was determined that chemical residue in his Prius matched what was found at the crime scene. This could be expected if he had used the vehicle to transport the bomb. At a press conference in the following days, U.S. Attorney Nick Hanna said this was a horrific, intentional attack that killed an innocent woman and severely injured 2 others. Those 2 surviving victims will have to live with the physical and emotional scars of this attack for the rest of their lives. He said he would do everything possible to secure justice for those victims and to bring the perpetrator to account for what they did. Ildiko's friend Irene spoke on behalf of the family again, saying, "We are pleased an arrest has been made after 9 long months. We continue to grieve the loss of Ildiko, as well as wrestle with the other implications of what appears to be Mr. Beal's horrific actions." At Stephen's indictment on March 13, 3 more felonies were added to his charge: the use of a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death, the use of a destructive device in relation to a crime of violence, and possession of an unregistered destructive device. The mass destruction charge carried a potential death penalty or life prison term, while the other 2 charges brought a maximum of 30 years and 10 years in prison. At his arraignment in Santa Ana, the 60-year-old pled not guilty to all counts. Things were about to get worse for the accused killer when, in February 2020, Stephen was charged with wire fraud, Social Security fraud, and the concealment of bankruptcy assets. Stephen stood accused of concealing $350,000 of the life insurance payout he received after Christine's death. Stephen was required to declare the money to the court in the terms of his bankruptcy, but he didn't. At the same time, the Department of Justice was still deciding whether to pursue the death penalty in the bombing case. In June of 2020, the prosecution finally announced that they would not be seeking the death penalty. Well, I guess that's one good thing for Stephen. The 63-year-old's trial finally got underway in June of 2022. The assistant United States attorneys told the court that this was a case about obsession, infatuation, and control. Despite Stephen telling investigators that things had ended amicably, and the fact that he'd only recently started dating Valerie at the time of the bombing, he had not moved on from his relationship with Ildiko at all. I actually thought that they had been together for a year from what Stephen had said and maybe broken up for some time, but I guess not. It was only in March of 2018, 2 months before Ildiko's spa was bombed, that she and Stephen took that trip to Portugal where he found out she was texting another man, and he couldn't handle it. He made it sound like this happened so long ago and he was okay with it all, but he wasn't. He was humiliated and he wanted to make her pay. If he couldn't have Ildiko, then nobody could. Ildiko's friends knew she was scared of Stephen and that he could harm her. He carefully planned his revenge in a way that he thought only he was smart enough to pull off. While Ildiko was away in Hungary, Stephen purchased the items he needed for that bomb. He constructed it at his home, and then he drove it to the spa on May 11th, so it was waiting for her when she returned. And he didn't care who else was hurt, even killed, as a result. The jury was also reminded that Ildiko's life wasn't the only one destroyed that day. It was a miracle that Lena and Elliot survived, but they had to live with the aftermath for the rest of their lives. In a letter to the court, one of the women said, "Fear has become my foundation, and worry my reality. I am a different, lesser version of who I used to be." While the mother and daughter may have been on the road to physical recovery, the psychological trauma would stay with them forever. It was a similar story for employees and clients of a mental health clinic which was situated opposite the spa. Many clients refused to return for treatment, and staff continued to suffer from PTSD. The jury heard that in Stephen's capacity as business manager, he had access to Ildiko's day spa schedule online, and he would have been able to see when she had clients. In the days leading up to the explosion, he had been checking the appointments day in and day out, using his own login details, as well as checking Ildiko's Facebook page to see when she got back into the country. If he did want to truly avoid harming anyone, it was too late to drive from the spot to Long Beach to retrieve the bomb. But he could have called Ildiko and told her not to touch the package, but he didn't. For the defense's case, they argued that both the investigators and the prosecutors were trying to make the evidence fit their theory that Stephen was responsible, rather than focusing on anyone else. They could be right. They zeroed in on Stephen from the beginning, and that is true. But there were reasons why. However, the defense said Max, the handyman, would have been one of the only people to know that the building's security cameras weren't working, and was also sending Ildiko unwanted and uncomfortable text messages. They said it wasn't as cut and dry as Stephen being a vengeful ex who wanted to punish Ildiko. Remember, they were in contact, and Stephen was respectful and sentimental in multiple messages he exchanged with Ildiko following their breakup, and she reciprocated. There was proof that Ildiko was still open to meeting up with Stephen and being intimate, and this was very close in time to her killing. The defense claimed there wasn't a smoking gun in the form of abusive and threatening text messages or emails. It didn't show that Stephen was angry or vindictive enough to do what the prosecution was alleging. The defense even tried to explain away the battery purchase, saying that Ildiko used those same batteries in her spa equipment, so it wasn't unusual for Stephen to purchase one. Nor did they claim it was out of the ordinary for Stephen to have bought a cardboard box. He was in the middle of doing home improvement projects, and these boxes were required to store and move items while he was working. Finally, they argued that Stephen was only in the spa for 10 minutes on May 11th. He was there to check if there was enough room for a facial machine that Ildiko was bringing back from Hungary, which she was. After hearing 6 months of evidence that was collected from 66 witnesses, the jury went to deliberate. As the days dragged on without a verdict, things were not looking good for the prosecution. On August 22nd, there was finally a decision. It was a hung jury. 9 jurors thought Stephen was guilty, but 3 did not. While the jury felt Stephen had the means and opportunity to commit such a crime, not all of them could agree beyond a reasonable doubt that he had the motive or that the battery had indeed been one of the bomb components. So the judge declared a mistrial. There was no question for the prosecution. They knew they wanted to go straight back for a retrial, and Stephen remained in jail until they did so. On June 29, 2023, another trial began for Stephen. This time, the prosecution was led by U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada. They played a recreation video. It was filmed in a controlled outdoor space and used a mannequin to emphasize to the jury just how destructive this bomb had been, especially for someone who opened the box. The same type of device, chemicals, and electrical components were used. One of the most disturbing things about the recreation was that the mannequin was torn apart in a strikingly similar way to Ildiko's injuries. There was nothing left of the mannequin's arms, hands, and its legs had been severed. Compared to the crime scene photos of Ildiko's body parts, the comparison was chilling. Stephen's new attorneys again put Stephen's fiancée, Valerie, on the stand. She was the perfect person to refute the prosecution's narrative that Stephen was consumed by jealousy about Ildiko dating other men. If Stephen had moved on from his ex, why would he have gotten together with Valerie just weeks later? And why would he have proposed to her? Valerie testified that she never saw any signs that Stephen gave a second thought about Ildiko beyond his involvement in the business. She truly felt like he was innocent and had become convinced, even more so following the failed FBI sting. If Stephen had done this, she felt he would have confessed, but he didn't. Sadly, it wasn't until after Stephen's second trial that Valerie learned her boyfriend had still been texting Ildiko after they started dating. I can't imagine how humiliating that must have been, knowing that you're going to court and finally hearing these details. But of course, the reason Valerie didn't learn this earlier was that she was a witness. She wasn't allowed to know anything about the court proceedings. This deeply unpleasant and public revelation was the end of her and Stephen's relationship. She felt like a fool this time. When it came to deliberations, it took just 2 hours for them to reach a verdict. On July 19th, Stephen was found guilty on all 4 counts. Outside court, U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada said, using his expertise in explosives, Mr. Beal cowardly murdered his former girlfriend, permanently injured 2 other victims who were her customers, and risked the safety of many others in the area, including a daycare center across the street. Thanks to the thorough investigation by the FBI, Orange County Sheriff's Department, Orange County Fire Department, and other law enforcement partners, I'm pleased the jury saw through Mr. Beal's efforts to avoid responsibility for his deplorable actions. Of course, Stephen will still be facing those 2 separate federal fraud charges. But in early November 2023, he pleaded guilty. As part of his plea, Stephen admitted to receiving $1.3 million in disability and $350,000 in Social Security benefits while lying about having aphasia. At Stephen's sentencing on January 19, 2024, the very minimum he could expect to receive was the mandatory 30 years in federal prison. Many of Ildiko's loved ones addressed the court. Their pain was still very evident when they gave their victim impact statements. Her cousin Eva addressed Stephen saying, quote, "She was an amazing person who was loved by many. To me, she was a shining star. I looked up to her and loved her so much. I can have peace in knowing that you will finally get what you deserve. You have single-handedly destroyed my family." When Stephen himself addressed the court, he was not remorseful. He said, quote, "The only thing I can say is that I always have and always will maintain my innocence. I wish the person who committed this crime was sitting here and not me." Judge Stanton responded to this by noting the cruel and callous nature of Stephen's plan, describing him as likely to remain a danger to the public for the rest of his life. He wanted her dead simply because she didn't want to continue their romantic relationship. The defendant apparently decided revenge is a dish best served cold. The cold, calculating nature of the crime is chilling. Stephen was sentenced to 2 counts of life imprisonment, a consecutive 30-year prison sentence for the 3rd count, and a 10-year concurrent sentence on the 4th count. Ildiko's family was overjoyed at the decision. Outside court, her cousin Eva said, "After 5 years of waiting and wondering, our family and friends have peace in knowing that Mr. Beal will spend his remaining days in prison. She will live forever in our hearts and never be forgotten." Today, 64-year-old Stephen resides at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Los Angeles. Federal prosecutors maintain that the circumstances surrounding the death of his late wife, Christine, are suspicious. What do you think about Christine? What do you think about whether Stephen did this or not? Just this year, in late January 2024, Stephen appealed both his conviction and sentence with the U.S. Court of Appeals. If his appeal is denied, Stephen will die in prison, as parole does not apply for his federal sentence. A restitution hearing is scheduled for April 12th for Judge Stanton to determine how much restitution Stephen will be ordered to pay to Lena and Ellie. That's because of the ongoing pain and suffering they continue to live with every day as a result of his actions. We hope for the sake of Ildiko's loved ones that things are resolved swiftly and they can focus on remembering what a warm, loving, and vivacious person she was. Someone who was living her life to the fullest and worked hard to make a success for herself. She set an incredible example for everyone around her. Her son, Keanu, continues to grieve the loss of his mother, but he honors her zest for life by focusing on positivity and recalling his mother's uplifting energy, which she encapsulated so well by once writing on the back of a treasured photograph, quote, "Life isn't always this happy, but you have to keep living on. I'm going to try." Just a few days prior to Halloween in 2018, a young girl was excitedly preparing for a night of trick-or-treating. This day is one of the highlights of childhood, the rare occasion when zombies stroll alongside Disney princesses and Marvel superheroes. For this one special night, you can transform into anyone you wish, and the abundance of free candy only adds to the joy of the occasion. 3-year-old Addison eagerly awaited her mother to join her and her father so she could proudly display her costume and gather candy. However, when Addison's mom failed to arrive for their trick-or-treating adventure, the family realized something was terribly wrong. When the harsh truth was revealed, Halloween would forever lose its festive spirit. Let me introduce you to Lauren Kidd and her family. To do that, I need to take you back in time to introduce Lauren's parents, Joe and Krista Kidd. They are both incredibly charming, and their chemistry as a couple is even more delightful. In 1992, Krista had moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, as a 23-year-old single mama of her 3-year-old son, Joshua. She had just landed a job at an apartment complex as a leasing agent, and one day she crossed paths with 22-year-old Joe Kidd while he was working at the complex's fitness facility. They hit it off. Joe accepted Krista's son as his own, and they became a little family of 3 and ultimately got married. Now 3 years later, Krista had some exciting news. She was pregnant. Of course, with this being Joe's first child of his own, there were so many emotions running through him. He was scared, he was excited, he was wondering if he was ready for this. But soon enough, the time had come. The couple welcomed little Lauren Ashley Kidd into the world on December 5th, 1996, just a few days before Krista's own birthday on December 11th, and 20 days before Christmas. Krista said that Lauren's birth was the best birthday and Christmas gift combined that she could have ever asked for. She thought her newborn looked like a perfect porcelain doll. Everyone in Joe's family was waiting for Lauren's arrival. She was Joe's parents' first granddaughter, so it was a very special time for them. Joe's dad, Dustin, who was known as Dusty but called Pawpaw by the family, was just the best with kids. He was the type of grandpa that did everything for his grandchildren, not just teaching them things, but just loving on them so much. Even Joshua, who wasn't Joe's biological child, was treated like family, and he loved Pawpaw. So did little Lauren. There's a home video from a visit they made to Mumford, Tennessee, to Pawpaw's in April of 1998, right after Lauren had turned 16 months old. How precious is this video of her just jumping on Pawpaw, and he is just loving every moment. This family was very close. You can tell how important relationships like this meant to the Kidd family. They truly valued the love that they shared with one another, and life was good, until change came a year later in 1999. The company that both Krista and Joe had been working for went into bankruptcy, so they had to make a big move out to Phoenix, Arizona for a new job opportunity. But Joe and Krista were the type of people who made things fun and memorable. They knew this was going to be hard on their family, so instead of making it a work-related move, they looked at it like an adventure, a family vacation that they called their working vacation. Here's a cute picture of Krista, Joe, Josh, and Lauren on that vacation. A 1,000-mile road trip, and they weren't in a rush. They took their time, took in all their new surroundings, being tourists in their new home. The kids had never seen mountains before. The weather was different, the view was new to them, and little Lauren was adventurous. Like many children that age, everything new was exciting. She was pointing at everything and asking, "Mama, what's that? What's that?" They were documenting everything with pictures and home videos. It wasn't easy moving far away from everything that they were used to, but they made the transition as easy as possible. Lauren was a very active little girl. She loved to sing. She was actually a very good singer from a young age, and she also developed a love for sports. She thrived playing soccer and was absolutely fearless. She started playing when she was only 4 years old, and her favorite position was actually goalie. Krista was kind of surprised because, the ball was coming flying towards Lauren, but she had no fear. She loved it. She was in her element. She, of course, had that sense of adventure, and I want to show you this cute little home video of Joe interviewing Lauren about one of her big games. Joe was so proud of his little girl. He was beaming watching her get into the sport. Lauren made an impression on the field. All eyes were on her. But before the family could truly settle in, they decided they wanted to be closer to family once again. In 2002, they picked up and moved all the way back to Tennessee to be close to Joe's father. That's where Lauren started kindergarten in another new place. Still being as young as she was, this transition was easy for her. She was excited. She had her cute little Barbie backpack on. She gathered up all her school supplies, ready to take on another new adventure. Mom was always there to document every moment, and I'm sure she was very glad that she did. Krista asked her how it went, and here is Lauren's response. "Where's your first day at school?" "It was great. All right, we took pictures, and whenever it was time to go home, I even got a treat." You can hear Joe's voice as he's putting on Lauren's seatbelt. He's just wonderful as he's listening to his little girl, excited as ever, as she's asking politely if she can eat her treat on the way home. "It's in my backpack." "All right, wonderful. Can I eat it on the way home?" "Sure." Most of us either remember being that little because our parents also made these videos, or because we made them for our kids. But for now, it was all happiness. Lauren looked so much like her mom with those almond-shaped eyes and the high cheekbones. They were like twins. But there was another little mini-me coming because Krista was pregnant with her and Joe's second child that year. That ultimately made the family decide they needed to be closer to Krista's family so that they could get help with the kids. Now having 3 would prove to be a lot more work, with 2 needing to go to school and a newborn coming. It was a lot, so they made the hard decision to relocate back to Oklahoma. With Lauren just settling in back in Arizona, to move to Tennessee to be close to Pa, and then to realize they would be moving once again, it was tough on her. It would be tough for anyone. They actually say the stress of moving is as bad as a divorce or death when it comes to all the emotions and changes. I know it comes with a lot of stress, but I beg to differ on it being as bad as losing a loved one. I bet any of us would agree to move anywhere to not have a loved one pass away. But I understand stress-wise, it's difficult. I hate moving myself, but the Kid family knew that it would be best for them, even though Lauren wasn't dealing very well with all the change. By the fall of 2002, her little brother Dustin was born. Krista went into labor on October 25th, and by the next day, around 2 p.m. on October 26th, little Dustin was born, named after his papa. Lauren was so excited. She was so happy when she found out she was getting yet another brother. She loved her brothers. She was very protective over them. She cared for them and developed a strong bond with them. She loved being their sister. Halloween was a favorite holiday for Lauren and her siblings, and Krista always made it special, even more so once Dustin's birthday was so close. It's perfect because everyone is in the spirit. They all get dressed up and get into character. And look how cute little Dustin is right here as Tigger. Lauren was Snow White, and she always loved dressing like a little princess, which is fitting since, to her father at least, she was the closest thing to a real-life princess. To say that Lauren was a daddy's girl would be an understatement. She was his everything, and he was hers. She hangs on her father with her tiny arms wrapped around his neck in a hug that reveals the love and trust that she placed in her daddy. As a family, Halloween was a time when the kids really came together. Everyone was involved in trick-or-treating every year and the birthday festivities. The Kid family had traditions that went beyond Halloween. They spent a lot of time learning from Papa. The thing he loved to do was take them hunting. And Lauren, again, she's fearless, not afraid to hold a rifle, learn how to shoot it, listen, and try to take direction. But she was also kind of feisty, and even when Papa would tell her to be careful with that backfire so that she wouldn't hurt herself, she liked to be in control. There were a few times she didn't exactly listen, but looking back at these moments years later, Dustin, who we see right here when he was a little boy, found this moment to be really cute. He remembered his sister Lauren as always being open to try new things and making sure she had fun with her brothers. She never left them out. She was the type of big sister who always involved them in the things that she was getting into, unlike some siblings who can't stand their little brothers or sisters. Not Lauren. And that was good because she had yet another little brother. February 2005 brought little Tyler Kid into the world, and I swear he looks like Lauren's twin. He had a lot of fun with Lauren and her friends. They treated him like their own little baby boy, but actually, they would dress him up in girls' clothes and even put makeup on him. When Tyler got older, one of Lauren's friends came up and was like, "Oh my God, I remember you. I used to dress you up and put makeup on you." As embarrassing as it was a cherished memory. Lauren adored her new little playmate and couldn't get enough of dressing him up and transforming him into her own living doll. By this time, the family had a lot keeping them busy with 4 kids running around. But one thing was stable, and that is where they were living. Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Broken Arrow is a city in northeastern Oklahoma. It's actually the 4th largest city in the state, with a population of around 115,000 people. So it's not really a small town, and it's the largest suburb of Tulsa. Another fact I found quite interesting, considering we're talking about a murder, is that Broken Arrow is known as the safest city in Oklahoma. Yep, it's true according to Google. But cities don't kill people. People kill people. And you can never predict who will be living in your safe city. Broken Arrow is also one of the best and most affordable places to live in America for families. And it seemed like the perfect place for the Kid family, a place where they could raise their children. They were truly doing their very best to give them everything they needed. I actually wondered what this area was known for, because it definitely had the city life, but there's also a lot to do outdoors. Here's a video of the kids spending time swimming. There's Lauren in the foreground. She's 12, almost 13 here. It's 2009. And when I zoomed in on Google Maps, there were so many homes in this area, but it didn't actually look like there was anything else. Just a bunch of neighborhoods. I mean, yes, there were nature parks, museums, and restaurants, the usual, but I could see how this could get a bit boring for older kids. And well, Lauren was definitely going through a bit of a rough patch at this age. It's an in-between age you're in. Middle school, you've got hormones, the uncertainty of just not fitting in and just coming into your own. Unfortunately, Lauren was having a hard time. Her mental health was suffering. Krista wanted to help as much as she could, so she brought her in for an evaluation with the doctor, who ended up diagnosing Lauren with ADHD. I'm sure that you've heard of ADHD, and maybe you even suffer yourself. It's a condition that affects someone's ability to concentrate and sometimes control their impulses. To help Lauren, she was placed on medication to mitigate some of these symptoms. But instead of helping her, the medication started to change Lauren's personality. Rather than the outgoing and playful child she once was, she became withdrawn and quiet. Her mom said that Lauren's essence just faded away. What made Lauren seemed to become subdued, and slowly she began to drift away from her old group of friends. Trying to find a place to belong was really hard that year. It was hard for her to navigate these shifting dynamics, and life would get even worse for the then teenage Lauren. This really was hard. I don't know if you remember this, but in 2009, the swine flu pandemic hit. It was the H1N1 virus. And it was a scary time, very similar to what we saw with COVID, but of course on a somewhat smaller scale. Children, young adults, and the elderly were the most affected, and unfortunately Lauren contracted it, as well as Dustin and Papa too. Sickness is no joke, and in 2009, this flu was devastating. It swept across the world and killed more than 284,000 people. Much like the 2020 pandemic, the swine flu affected so many families. They were torn apart because of fatalities. And sadly, Papa was taken away from Lauren and her family. He didn't make it through the swine flu. If Lauren's mental health was suffering before getting sick, you can only imagine what being ill and then losing someone so close to you would do. The kids were just sitting in the driveway one afternoon when Joe pulled up. That's when he gathered them around and broke the news to them that Papa had passed away. They could not believe it. They did not want this to be true. He was never coming back. They'd never get to hug him or learn from him again. It was just horrible, and just like that, Lauren had lost one of the major male figures in her life. The whole family felt a void that just could not be filled. Being a teenager is hard enough, but adding a devastating loss while on a mood-altering medication did not make it any easier for Lauren to navigate these very difficult times. Here's a family pictures from 2010. Lauren is holding a ghost-shaped piñata for her brother's Halloween birthday bash as he was turning 8. He's blindfolded, and he's trying to hit it. Of course, Lauren is messing around. She's pulling it up, making it harder and harder for him while everyone is laughing and carrying on. But you hear Mama in the background while Joe was there guiding Dustin. Krista says, "Lauren, come on, you've got to make it easier. It's got to be doable for him. Lauren, come on, it's got to be doable." This may seem like normal teenage antics, but behind this small action, there was actually a lot of pain. Lauren was keeping something from her family. She was looking for ways to manage her emotions, and like so many troubled teens, she turned to self-harm. Now I want us to be sensitive to this topic because it's not always understood, and that's why I'm here. I like to shed light on these things, to humanize them, and the people that are facing these hardships. I researched it, and it made sense. After learning why people do it, they want to feel in control of something when their life is chaotic. It usually starts when a devastating event occurs, or it could be other trauma, physical, sexual, bullying. Many things can result in individuals turning to harming themselves. It usually starts small, a little cut here and there on the thigh or on the arms, somewhere you could hide it with clothing. I read that sometimes it makes a person feel alive, to remind themselves that they're here, that they can feel, and the pain makes them realize that they still exist in this world, where they may feel very insignificant and misunderstood and scared. Lauren began cutting herself. She was cutting on her arms, and despite her best efforts to conceal what she was doing, Krista became aware. She knew Lauren's secret, and she urged her to please stop. It was really hard for Krista to understand. She had this image of her beautiful daughter in her mind, and she couldn't make sense as to why Lauren would essentially desecrate her body. And that's fair. I think many of us can understand that. Being a parent and being afraid for our child, and maybe also feeling like a failure. Krista continued to photograph the family, but this time it wasn't her daughter smiling and happy. It was darker and sadder. It was close-ups of Lauren's self-inflicted wounds. Krista was watching Lauren. Every few days, she would make Lauren roll up her sleeve and show her her arm, and she would take pictures because she wanted to know if there were more as the days went by. While Lauren complied with her mother's wishes, she started to grow frustrated at the scrutiny. She was convinced that she had everything under control. She didn't need any help from her mom. She thought that Krista was being overbearing and overreacting, trying to control her. She didn't think this self-harm was a big deal. As Lauren was a teenager, and I think we all know that when you're a teenager, you think you know everything. That can be scary as a parent, knowing that our kids think that they know best when we know that they don't. This was a very trying time for the family, and while Krista and Joe were doing what they thought was right in supporting their little girl, they were already many steps behind. They just didn't know it. It didn't seem to make sense to Krista, but Lauren was hiding a darker secret, one that was the catalyst of this whole situation. She would tell her parents not to worry, that she was fine and would figure it out, but she really wasn't. She just became more and more upset as her parents tried to do their best to help. They were desperate for answers, and it took a while, but Krista finally found out what happened. Lauren was hanging out with a new group of friends at the time, and they all left Lauren behind with a boy in the group. Well, he pushed himself on her. He pinned her against a wall, and he forced her to do sexual things against her will. This was emotionally devastating and physically devastating for Lauren. She was so young, she didn't know how to deal with it. She was so embarrassed to tell her parents what really happened, and I'm sure that you can think of all the terrible feelings that come with something like this. Lauren hid the secret from everyone, but once Krista became aware of everything, she really felt terrible. She tried to convince Lauren to see a therapist to get help, and finally, she did. Things started to look up. The next couple of years went really well for the family. Lauren got better, she was happy again. She was making friends, and one of those friends was named Dylan. Well, he ended up introducing her to a friend of his named Zachary Maine. This was in 2012, he was a skater boy, and Lauren was smitten. I cannot help but think of A.A.L. Levine when I hear skater boy, but instead of saying see you later boy, if you know, you know. Lauren was glued to Zach, Everyone could tell that they had such a strong connection. Look how cute they are right here, all smiles. Sparks started to fly between the two love-struck teenagers, and it didn't take long for them to be joined at the hip. Lauren's family accepted Zach right away. Her brothers liked him a lot. He fit right in. They could tell how happy he made Lauren, and he acted like an older brother to Dustin and Tyler. He would play with them. He would hang out with them. Lauren and Zach officially became a couple in February of 2012 when they were 16 years old. A girl's first love is something very special, and Zach was Lauren's for sure. If there's anything true about teens being in love, it's that they are bound to make some pretty impulsive decisions. But Zach and Lauren's impulsive decisions weren't about, sneaking a kiss underneath the bleachers at school. No, these two decided to take their impulsiveness and love to a whole new level. One day during Lauren's senior year of high school, her father, Joe, returned home from work for lunch and came home to find Lauren and her friends carrying boxes from her room outside. Well, of course, I think he had a sneaking suspicion about what was going on, but Lauren told him matter-of-factly that she was moving out and he couldn't stop her. She and Zach had gotten their own apartment, and not only that, they were planning to get married. Yes, this was quite a surprise. Lauren was barely an adult and her dad was, okay, I know this was to be expected at some point, but it's the middle of your senior year. But it didn't stop Lauren. She left home to live with her boyfriend. Trying to stop a teenager who has their mind set on something is almost impossible. Krista had already lost that battle before, so this time she let Lauren go off and be independent on her own. But you know what? Joe trusted Lauren and Zach. They were good kids. They were smart, with good heads on their shoulders. He was sad. He didn't want to see his baby girl move out, but he trusted that she would make good choices. But not long after this move, Krista became suspicious. It's always said that a mother's intuition never fails, and Krista's intuition was telling her that there was something up with her daughter. She thought that Lauren might be pregnant, and that was why she was rushing everything. Eventually, Krista convinced Lauren to go to a doctor's appointment, and they gave her a pregnancy test. Just as she suspected it was positive, Krista's intuition was spot on. On March 22, 2015, Lauren gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Addison Nicole Main. Some parents may be disappointed or mad about their teenage daughter getting pregnant and having a child, but Krista and Joe were overjoyed with Addison's arrival. Joe said that watching his daughter bring another little girl into this world was amazing, and it didn't stop Lauren from achieving her goals either. Just a few months after giving birth, she graduated from high school, and it was a significant milestone in her life. It marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. She had told her mom when she was moving out that her intention was to graduate, get married, and get a job, and she was on her way to fulfilling those promises. By the next year, on July 16, 2016, Lauren and Zach got married, and it was such a happy day for them and for Lauren's family. They both looked absolutely stunning. Tyler remembers seeing his big sister in her wedding dress with her pretty red hair and just being in awe of her beauty. Zach was smiling from ear to ear. He was just looking at his bride. So much happiness. They were now Mr. and Mrs. Main. They spent their honeymoon in Branson, Missouri. They spent their honeymoon in Branson, Missouri. In the Ozark Mountains, where they visited Silver Dollar City, which is an over 60-acre amusement park. I see why Lauren and Zach would love this. It looks like so much fun, especially right now in the fall with their harvest festival going on. Zach and Lauren really liked this fun house called Grandfather's Mansion. There were a lot of optical illusions, and here's Lauren and Zach in front of this leaning mirror. But Lauren mentioned in a post on Facebook that she appreciated the cave. She said there was so much history and gorgeous structures that she couldn't wait to visit again. And here's a picture of her and Zach inside. So how does everything in Lauren's life go from being so perfect to so perfectly heartbreaking? Everything was falling into place. That's why stories like this are so frightening, because in this moment, life was so good. Everyone loved each other. So how does it all go so wrong? Joe thought that Zach and Lauren would be together forever, but they were so young. Not to say that it's not possible, but many of us know how many changes we go through as young people. Lauren was only 19. She was still a child herself in many ways, and now she was raising one of her own with her equally young husband. But they were good parents. They cared so deeply about their little Addison. She was their world. But I also wanted to get to know Lauren more, so of course I went to her Facebook and looked at the things that she wrote about, what she shared, and what she cared about. Halloween goodies and desserts were her favorite. Here's a post where she said now she looks as emo as she feels. She said, "I'm just going to avoid all situations that could cause anxiety today." This post was so telling about Lauren. On March 11th, just days before Addison's first birthday, she wrote, "When you have your own issues, but you push them down so that you can do your best to make everyone pleased with you, but then months, years in the future, they fester and they get worse, and you start changing, and no one tells you until it looks too late. Now who are you?" This sounds like many young people who are coming into their own. They're learning about who they are in this world, and it appears from Lauren's own words that she would suffer quietly and put on a happy face to make everyone else happy. But deep down, not expressing that was changing her. But she was staying strong for her daughter. She loved being with Addison. She loved laying with her and listening to the thunder and the rain. In this post, she says she's laying on the edge of the bed, listening to thunder and rain and loving it, and Addison is laying parallel to the pillows with one foot in her shoulder blade and one on her neck. But there was also a storm brewing inside Lauren. By October of 2016, Lauren posted that as much as she loved spending time with Addison, she loved cuddling her whenever she wanted and watching her learn and grow. She was ready to get out there and start working again. She shared an article in this post about the isolation that mothers feel staying home. She began looking for a job, and she and Zach were also looking for more ways to save money. That's when the idea of living with another couple they knew from high school came up. They knew a guy named Connor Brunner and his girlfriend, Alexandra Finley. So the four of them decided to get a place together. That way, they could split the rent and afford a bigger apartment with more amenities and room for Lauren, Zach, and little Addison. This right here may have been the complex that they lived in. Lauren was so proud of herself, the apartment, her silver car. She was also proud that she landed a job. On May 25th, 2017, she posted, "Yes, who works at Evolution? This girl." Evolution was a local and well-known smoke shop in their area. They sell everything. They sell, pipes, smoking paraphernalia, e-cigarettes, vapes, that sort of thing. It was no secret that Lauren enjoyed smoking with her friends, and they frequently went to the store, so she was excited to work there. She would be meeting a lot of new people, a lot of new friends, including one of her best friends, a guy named Blake Beeman. They met when he came in there looking for a birthday gift for a friend, and Lauren was so helpful and so happy. She was easy to talk to, and they quickly became friends. Blake wanted to maintain contact with her because she knew how to help whenever you were going through something. Lauren was a good friend, and remember that post about isolation as a mom? Well, now she could get out, she could be social again, and she could get back to herself and her life. That's very important, to feel like you have your own life aside from just being a mom, especially for a young girl like Lauren, who kind of had to put everything on hold to raise Addison. It was a fun time for the two couples living together. They were having fun, socializing, and I saw this post from Lauren of Connor sitting on their couch with a donut box on the table. It said, "Walked out to get donuts, not fam. Connor is on it." This is very reminiscent of a lot of our teenage years. Not too many cares in the world, just trying to make it. It seemed like Lauren was trying to make it all work out. Here she is in a video with Addison on her second birthday. She loved Frozen, Lil Elsa, and Anna. Everyone doted on Addison, Lauren and Zach, of course, and Zach's parents, Joe and Krista. They loved that little girl so much. But reading Lauren's Facebook post, you can definitely tell she was hinting at something. This one said that rereading the same chapter over and over again will not tell you the full story. And isn't that the truth? That was May of 2017, and just a few weeks later, She posted a video about explaining depression to your mother. She said that it made her cry. She couldn't stop crying watching that video. She also changed her hair color. This was her dark era. She wore the dark lipstick and makeup, and it was almost like an outward expression that Lauren was changing. Her mind was changing, her choices were changing, and as much as she loved Zach, they were drifting apart. The more Lauren came into who she was at the time, getting to know herself a little better, meeting new people and broadening her horizons, there was friction between her and Zach. It's particularly hard when there's a child involved, but a breakup was definitely on the horizon. Maybe the strength to break up with Zach came from a change that she watched her friends go through. Connor and Alex broke up a couple of months before this, and Alex had moved out. Knowing that this happens and that you can get through it, made it easier to decide to do it for herself. It was hard, but ultimately, Zach decided to leave the apartment and go back to live with his mom, taking Addison with him. He definitely wasn't happy. This is not what he wanted, but he had no choice. They were young newlyweds, still growing as individuals while simultaneously trying to grow as a couple with a child. As if that wasn't enough to deal with, they had to grow into their roles as parents. Now, all of this would put a strain on even the strongest relationships. In 2017, the space between them just grew too wide. They couldn't reconcile. So, they called it quits and filed for divorce. Even when the breakup had already happened, things were getting tumultuous, especially when one of the parties moves on with someone new. There's no doubt that Lauren was a very beautiful girl. She was also intelligent, funny, kind, and she was a great mom, so it's no surprise that it didn't take her long to find love again. However, the fact that she had moved on isn't what caused another rift between her and Zach. It was who Lauren decided to move on with that caused a really big issue. As it turns out, Lauren had found love pretty close to home. In fact, it was in the same apartment. Yes, she and Connor, the roommate that Lauren and Zach moved in with. Well, you know what? This is all too common. You've got someone there already. Lauren and Connor already knew each other. They lived together, they were there for each other, and they were both going through breakups. They got close. Connor made Lauren extremely happy. He got her. They clicked, and he was also great with Addison, who already knew him from having lived in the same apartment with him and Lauren, as well as Alex and Zach. It made sense, and it wasn't much of a surprise to people who knew Lauren, but for Zach, it was devastating. When something like this happens to someone like Zach, who is on the receiving end, all they can really think about is going back to all the times that Connor and Lauren were together when they were all living together. It can start to drive you crazy. You're just replaying it over and over again, thinking, were they planning this all along? But that doesn't change anything. It just seemed like Lauren and Connor found the cure to their broken hearts in one another. Zach was understandably very upset, and Lauren was honest with him. She told him that she was in love with Connor. She didn't want him to find out from somewhere else. What made it worse is that Zach never really liked Connor to begin with. Before he started hooking up with his now ex-wife, Lauren remained in the apartment that she used to share with all of them, except now she was there with Connor, and they had it all to themselves. Lauren and Connor started to live their new lives together. The divorce was finalized in September of 2017. Lauren and Zach had joint custody of their 2-year-old daughter Addison, and they would switch every week, trying to co-parent as best they could for their daughter's sake. The thing is, there was another reason that Zach wasn't fond of Connor. He used drugs. And of course, because Lauren was close to him, she began doing drugs as well. This put even more of a strain on everything. It's hard enough to co-parent, but then you've got partying in the mix, drugs, and a new relationship, along with heartbreak. It was just a lot to deal with. There were arguments between Zach and Lauren, between Connor and Zach, and between Connor and Lauren. Everything was just a mess. But let's not forget they're still young. So there's no surprise that there's drama. Even at any age, this would be a lot of drama, and they like to go out. They like to socialize, bringing even more people into the mix and more drug use. Lauren's family didn't know what to think. Maybe this too shall pass. But Connor and Lauren were still together a year later in the fall of 2018, and nothing had really changed. Except Lauren. She had an entirely new group of friends with whom she did drugs, hung out, and partied on a regular basis. This included a close friend she met in early 2018, Shauna Jordan. They connected because they had a common interest in partying and smoking pot together. They had a lot of fun together, and they weren't always being good girls. They were actually partaking in some pretty risky behavior with sketchy people they would just meet through partying or doing drugs. It definitely wasn't the safest situation that they put themselves in. Now that Lauren was 21, she also went out and started drinking, going out even more and meeting more people to smoke with. She also started experimenting with harder drugs. It was a dark time for her and her friend Shanna. Shanna said that they were in a very negative state of mind at the time. Around this time, Lauren had this other Facebook profile. The name was Violet ARA, and the bio said, "Did System of 4, we have a 3-year-old daughter, currently working at Waffle House." Now, I looked this up and I might be mistaken, but I looked up did System of 4, and apparently did refers to dissociative identity disorder, and a system in relation to did is actually a group of 2 or more personalities or identities in one person. Some people refer to these different parts of their identity as alters, and it seems to make sense considering this sort of an alter ego profile of Lauren. She's got the dark hair and the dark makeup, and she says, "We have a 3-year-old daughter," which could reference her alters as a collective. I don't know if she was actually diagnosed with did, but it doesn't matter. What does is that we can see from this evidence that Lauren was definitely dealing with a lot. She had a lot going on, trying to still find herself. Let's jump to Friday, October 26th of that year, 2018. It's Dustin's birthday, and that day, Lauren had made plans with her mom, Krista. Lauren was going to get picked up from work by Krista and go over to her parents' house, but instead, Connor dropped her off that afternoon, and she spent time with her family. Well, being there was difficult because Krista could tell that things were not great with her daughter, and like many times before, she was just trying to help. She wanted Lauren to confide in her, but instead, Lauren shut down. She got upset. She thought that Krista was just prying into her life, and she was an adult now. She could figure it out. So they get into an argument, and she ends up storming off and leaving. What Krista didn't know in that moment is that that would be the very last time that she would ever see her daughter. The next night, Saturday, October 27th, Krista gets a phone call from Lauren's friend Blake. Blake tells her that Lauren is nowhere to be found, and he finds it odd because she was supposed to meet up with her ex, Zach, and little Addison for a trick-or-treating event, and she never showed up. When Krista heard this, she got a really bad gut feeling. We know that Halloween is a family tradition for them, and Addison was the most important person in Lauren's life. She wouldn't just not show up for something like that. Krista wanted to understand what Lauren had done that day, so Blake started to explain. He said that earlier that day, he met up with her. They hung out for a bit, and then he gave her a ride to a gas station nearby, where Lauren told him that she was going to get picked up from some guy named Mike West. Apparently, this Mike guy was a tattoo artist, and he did work out of his house. Lauren and he were designing a tattoo together, and then she was going to get it done that day. After this tattoo session, Blake was supposed to pick Lauren back up around 6 p.m. so that she could go meet up with Zach and Addison that evening. Well, Blake starts texting Lauren a little before 6 p.m. asking for an update, and she responds. She's giving him info about the progress of her tattoo, but then she just stops texting, and that was really odd. Blake wasn't sure what to do, so he's calling Lauren, but she's not picking up. Then he calls her friend Shayna, and he's like, "Have you seen Lauren?" She says no, and then she tries texting and calling. She gets no response, which is very unlike Lauren. We know everyone has their phones on them all the time, and Lauren would always quickly respond. But there was just nothing at all. When it was realized that Lauren never showed up to the trick-or-treating event, that caused her friends to become very alarmed. Once it got closer and closer to midnight, that's when Blake reached out to Krista. Something wasn't right, so Krista immediately sends a text to both Connor and Zach. It was late, but Zach does end up responding, and he's like, yeah, Lauren never showed up for their Halloween event that night with their daughter. That is when Krista became very concerned. She calls the Broken Arrow Police Department a little after midnight. It was actually 12:09 am in the early morning hours of Sunday, October 28th. As far as anyone knew, Lauren was last seen when she was dropped off at that gas station by Blake the day before. Sure, Blake had gotten text messages from Lauren's cell phone, but no one could prove if that was Lauren texting. No one had actually heard from her or seen her to confirm that she was actually texting them back. They needed to find this Mike West person. Considering it was in the middle of the night, things didn't exactly progress very quickly, but the police did start writing up that missing persons report. They gathered as much information as they could about Lauren and her last known whereabouts. Here's what they knew at the time. Lauren was 5 feet 6 inches, 125 pounds. She had blue eyes and black hair at the time. She was last seen on October 27th wearing black jeans with boots. She was also wearing a jacket and a black shirt underneath, along with a black collar necklace with a heart locket. She might be seen riding in a red Dodge Dart at 81st Street and Lynn Lane in Broken Arrow, which is right here on the map. And here is the gas station right here, so presumably this is the last place she was seen at. So police start the investigation by trying to figure out the movements of Lauren the day that she went missing. By later that day, they were able to get a hold of this Mike West person. He confirmed that he picked Lauren up at that gas station, and they went back to his house. They were designing the tattoo that she wanted, and sometime during their session, Mike said that Lauren's boyfriend Connor came through. This wasn't planned, but Lauren told Mike, "You know what? It's fine. I'm just gonna step out for a bit. I'll finish when I get back, and I shouldn't be too long." Except Lauren never came back. So now Connor needs to be contacted, and investigators reach out by calling him, asking the last time that he saw Lauren. He told them he thinks that sometime around lunchtime, it could have been between like 1 o'clock or 3 p.m. That afternoon, he went over to Mike's, he picked Lauren up, and he gave her a ride to a nearby Walmart store. He told investigators that Lauren asked him to pick her up and then take her to Walmart to meet up with a friend, and that she was actually just going to walk over to the friend's house, which was close by. Okay, but for what? They wondered. So Connor was kind of alluding that it was drug-related, but that was the last time he saw her. She never called to be picked back up. I don't know why Lauren was getting rides everywhere. At the time, I thought that she had her own car, but apparently she didn't, or it wasn't available, so she was relying on others to get places. Well, at least the investigators have somewhat of a timeline that they can work with. That's good because now they can go pull up video footage from places like that Walmart to see which direction Lauren went walking in, or if they could catch anything on camera. Meanwhile, when Krista is informed that Connor had come by Mike's to get Lauren, she wants to clarify to investigators that Connor is no longer dating her daughter, Lauren. He is her ex-boyfriend. They had broken up a number of times, but recently it seemed like they were broken up for good. Krista goes on to explain that the couple had a pretty toxic relationship and that it had gotten more and more intense in the last few months, with the cops being called. She was actually concerned when she found out that Connor was the one dropping off Lauren that day on Dustin's birthday, because Krista was under the impression that the two of them had officially called it quits. She didn't like Connor. She was definitely not a fan of where Lauren's life was going after they started dating. The drug use, the fights, it just wasn't what she wanted for her daughter. That was something that Krista tried bringing up that night when she saw Lauren last. And that's why Lauren got so upset. She didn't want her mom meddling. And that's common as a young person. They don't have much experience in love and relationships. They have these ups and downs. But the thing is, Krista had more information that these incidents had become physical. And that wasn't okay. She was trying to warn her daughter to stay away from Connor because he's bad news. And now her daughter is missing, with Connor possibly being the last person to see her. It just felt wrong. Even if it didn't, the people in Lauren's life were going to be looked at, all of them. Blake, Zach, Connor, Mike, and anyone else. The number of women who are killed by their partners or someone close to them is devastating. In the United States, about 3 women are killed by an intimate partner every single day. And worse is that the leading cause of death for pregnant women is homicide. That blows my mind, and usually, it's a spouse. Sadly, a lot of the time, the only way women ever leave these kinds of relationships is in a body bag. Krista is convinced that Connor knew more than he was letting on. But there was also Zach, and we know how angry he was over that breakup. This wasn't a fling either. It wasn't a rebound with Lauren and Connor. No, they stayed together, albeit they had this on and off relationship according to her mother. But unrequited love is another big reason that people can snap. Zach might have thought, if I can't have her, then no one can. But the only direction investigators could go in was to pull that footage from the Walmart. Here's some of it. There's the parking lot from different angles. They scrub through it around the times that Connor provided, but they don't see him, they don't see his car, and they don't see Lauren anywhere. Could they have been out of view? Maybe. But they really do not have much to go on here. No one knows where Lauren went, and the search continued for days without any sign of the young mother. And it's said, and we've heard it many times, those first 48 hours after a person goes missing are critical. After those 48 hours pass, the chance of finding a missing person alive becomes smaller and smaller. Those hours seem like an eternity for the Kidd family, and as time went on, their hope of a positive outcome in this case started to dwindle. Halloween, a once happy tradition for this family, became too much. Now it was haunting, the reminders of death and tragedy with every passing trick-or-treater in their ghostly costumes. Without Lauren, the darkness of that night was thicker than usual. The wind was more chilling. Where was she? They didn't have a clue until a couple of days following Halloween when an anonymous tip came in. Someone who was supposedly a friend of Connor said that they were hanging out with him on Halloween night. And at first, they might have thought it was fake blood, but they saw what looked like blood inside Connor's car. This wasn't for trick-or-treating, and it wasn't for Halloween because he was trying to hide it using seat covers. When they asked Connor about it, he said that he actually hit a dog and had to transport it inside his vehicle. He just didn't have a chance to clean up the mess. That sounded really suspicious, but at the time, this person wasn't aware that Connor's ex-girlfriend was missing. Now, knowing everything that they knew, this seemed like even more of a connection and not a coincidence. When investigators got this information, they ran a background check. I don't know why they didn't do this earlier, but they found out that Connor was previously charged with misdemeanor domestic battery and obstructing an officer. This was in the previous year, in February. It was an altercation between him and Lauren, but these charges were dismissed in April because Lauren never showed up to court. We know that many times in domestic situations, the partner who is being hurt will dismiss the charges because they end up going back to their abusive partner, and then the cycle continues. By the time Connor and Lauren broke up, he had already made his way into yet another relationship, and he seemed uninterested in his missing ex-girlfriend. Now, what happened to her? Now we're hearing that there was blood in his car, on the passenger seat and on the floorboards. With this new information, the investigators requested a search warrant for Connor's cell phone, his car, and his DNA. They were trying to get in touch with him while they waited for those warrants to come through. They asked him, "Hey, would you mind coming down to the station and giving a formal statement on record?" He agreed. So, they're sitting down with Connor, and we have some audio from this day. He tells them what we already know. He says that he picked up Lauren and they were hanging out for maybe 30 minutes to an hour. It was on October 27th. I picked Lauren up and we were out for maybe 30 minutes or an hour. But he now changes part of his story. He said that Lauren was begging him to take her to Target. Why? Because she needed needles. His words, needles for drugs. Lauren's not here to defend herself or to refute any of this information, and he's making it out to look like she's in the middle of getting a tattoo, which she planned for a while, but then she calls him out of nowhere to go get needles. It didn't really make that much sense, but this is his story. After she tried to buy needles from Target, I was like, I'm not trying to support your drug habits. I don't want you to do that. Then, I took her to Walmart. Apparently, you can buy a box of needles there. That's how drop he says he is. He's actually against it. He was trying to convince Lauren not to do drugs. He was trying not to support her bad drug habit. He didn't want her to do it. But if that was true, then why did he even agree to come pick her up? According to Blake, Mike West, and even Krista, the two were over. She wouldn't have reached out to Connor in that moment if she needed a ride. According to Mike, he came unannounced. It was more of a surprise to Lauren the way Mike explained it. But Connor goes on to explain that Lauren couldn't get these syringes from Target, so she had to be brought to Walmart. He takes her there, but we've heard about this location before. Apparently, he says you can buy a box of needles at this Walmart. So, he drops her off to do that. But why drop her off and not wait if you're her ride? Remember, the first time he spoke to police, he said that she was going to walk to a friend's house. So, the story is definitely changing, which is not a good sign. It's never a good sign. And we know that investigators already combed through footage outside of Walmart, and they didn't see Lauren or Connor. If something is just not adding up, the more they press Connor, the more the story changes. Once again, it's just twisting and turning. Now he says, "Oh no, I didn't leave Lauren behind at Walmart. I took her to a friend's house to get drugs." But then, when she tried to get back in, she was doing drugs, and I kicked her out of my car. Because remember, he wants to be the good guy. He doesn't want to support this bad habit. He's against Lauren's actions, and he's kicking her out because he doesn't want anything to do with this drug habit of hers, and that's why he never took her back to him. He has no idea what happened to her, according to him. So his story is that after dropping Lauren off alone on the road, he drove around for a little bit, then he made it to work from 4 to 9 p.m., and he's currently working at a family video. I didn't know that in 2018 there were still video stores, but apparently this one didn't shut down until 2021 after, the pandemic. It was a video game and movie rental store, and according to this sign they also sold CBD. I looked it up and here it is. 3601 South Aspen Avenue, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. It's not a video store anymore, it's now a cannabis store, and there seem to be a lot of those in this area. I told you there's not much to do here. But remember that they now have Connor's cell phone, while they're able to look at the GPS location information to see where Connor was that day. And there's one moment around 6 p.m., close in time, 20, said he picked Lauren up from Mike's when he's around this area at 51st Street and Aspen, and he's there for about 10 minutes. But he never mentioned this to the investigators. This is about a 9-minute drive from where he worked. It's a straight shot down Aspen Avenue, with Walmart being in between. So what was he doing there? He also went to Walmart like he said, but that wasn't until 10 p.m. that night. Now we have this alternate timeline, so they go back and they pull footage from that Walmart surveillance around 10 p.m. on October 27th, and sure enough, they spot Connor, and he is with a girl. So could he have gotten his times mixed up? Is this him and Lauren he's seen coming through the doors right here? He's looking down at his arm, and he's got a blonde girl to his right. Even though Lauren does change her hair color a lot, this doesn't look like Lauren. She's a white female around his age. They seem very comfortable. They're walking around together, they've got a shopping cart. This young couple walks through the aisles of Walmart. It's a few days before Halloween, so the shelves are filled to the brim with plastic jack-o'-lanterns, fake spiderwebs, witches' hats, and all sorts of other festive decorations. But this couple wasn't there to buy last-minute Halloween treats. Instead, they filled their shopping cart with a couple of items of clothing and something else, something that stood out even more: cleaning supplies. They bought a number of different cleaning supplies. Why? Was it in anticipation of a Halloween party, or was it something more sinister? They're just playfully going down the aisles, and at one point, Connor is like riding the front of the cart while this girl is pushing it. They finally paid for their items and casually walked out the front doors. They were going about their night like they had no care in the world, as if they weren't on their way to clean up a bloody crime scene, as if a girl hadn't been killed that night. When this video is shown to people that are familiar with Lauren and Connor, they identified this girl in the video as Alexander Finley, which is Connor's other ex-girlfriend, the one that Lauren and Zach used to live with when they all lived together. Remember that? Why was he with her that night? Well, we're about to find out because they make contact with Alex and they ask her about this little visit to Walmart with her ex-boyfriend. She explained that that night, Connor reached out to her out of the blue on the 27th. He told her this story about how one of his guy friends was with him that night, and he got into an altercation, which ended in his friend getting shot. This friend asked Connor for a ride to the hospital, so as a hero, Connor stepped up and he came through for his buddy. He dropped him off at the emergency room, and now he's worried. He's waiting to hear back about his friend's condition. Meanwhile, he's got a bloody mess to clean up in his car. He was calling his ex to ask her if she wanted to come to Walmart and grab a few things with him and help him clean. For whatever reason, this girl agreed. I guess Connor's cute. Obviously women who have dated him think so. But wow, doesn't this story sound sketchy to Alex? Well, investigators asked her that. She explained that at the time, she didn't know Lauren was missing. Remember, this was hours after Lauren was last seen, but a couple of hours before she was reported missing to police. Even though Connor's story was crazy, she said he did get in those types of situations. So Alex said she believed him. She even helped him dispose of his bloody clothing that night, and then she proceeded to help him clean up blood in his car. And that cleaning didn't exactly work. So once that warrant came through, they searched Connor's car. Here's the trunk. It had a black plastic tote inside and what looks like a duffel bag. But onto the passenger side, you can see that it looks like someone used some cleaning solution to try to remove the blood, but it didn't work. Even on dark cloth, you can see the stains, and from what's left behind, there must have been a lot of blood on the seat before it was cleaned. It's in the stitching. It's all over the side of the front passenger seat. It's down the middle of the side in between where the seat and the center console meet. And once the evidence technicians removed the seat, they could really see the extent of just how much blood was lost here. Look at this. That part couldn't be reached by someone just trying to stick their hand down there and clean it. It was just soaked all the way down to the metal that holds the seat in place and the hardware that connects the seatbelt fastener. All over the underneath, on the floor, was this from a dead dog? Was it from a buddy that got shot? Or was this Lauren's blood? While the investigators get samples of both Joe and Chris's DNA to create a profile that they could test against the samples they got from Connor's vehicle, you could have guessed it. It came back matching to Lauren. With this much blood lost, it was very unlikely that Lauren survived whatever happened in that car. So they confront Connor with all of this information, and he must have known that his story about Lauren leaving his car alive was no longer going to be believable. So what did he do? He changes his story yet again. He says that Lauren had asked him to drop her off to get drugs, and when she got back in the car, she said she needed help and that he needed to take her to another location. Nothing's making sense in the story at this point, by the way, so if it's sounding kind of all over the place, it is, because Connor is being caught in lies. The next one being that they weren't alone in this car. No, there were 2 drug dealers with them in his car. In the back seat, Lauren was buying drugs from them, and something went wrong. She began to yell at them. The police were not buying this new story that Connor was trying to sell them, but like with most lies, there might be some truth to the story, so they needed to take a closer look. Many times, when a suspect is trying to get away with a crime, they confess to smaller crimes, and they offer little breadcrumbs of truth which they conceal within their stories. And it quickly became clear that that's exactly what Connor was doing. They asked him, well, what happened next? Did these men hurt Lauren? And Connor was like, yeah, one of them pulled out a gun and they pointed it at Lauren's head and they shot her. Wow. And he goes on to say that this drug dealer was going to shoot Connor too, but instead he goes, no. He tells Connor to drive so that they could get rid of Lauren's body. And where might that have been? Well, he mentions an address to investigators, and they had heard it before, 51st Street and Aspen. Conveniently, that's a straight shot from where Connor works on Aspen Avenue. This is the same place where his GPS had him sitting idle for at least 10 minutes, around 6 p.m. on October 27th. The investigators ask, where can we find Lauren? and Connor just says, "Behind the coming G store, this one right here." So they press him further and ask, "Where is she?" And he literally says, "The trash can." He says it so casually, like he's talking about throwing away some garbage, the trash can. The investigators are trying to get clarification. They're like, "Do you mean a dumpster?" Penumpstex. And Connor's like, "Yeah." The investigators want to know, why? Why would she be put in there? And Connor, the coward, claims that's just where they put her. We all know they is really just him. He's an absolute monster. But is it true? It's been days since October 27th. It's around November 4th at the time when investigators are getting this confession from Connor. Trash is picked up regularly, especially from places like gas stations and convenience stores, and they fear that if this is true, then Lauren could be long gone. This is one of the worst parts of this story. They rushed over there to the Come and Go, and this is a picture from the front of that store. When they go around back, they don't find a trash dumpster. It's worse, it's a cardboard-only recycling bin. Now, if you've never seen one of these, they're actually behind a lot of stores that receive a bunch of inventory that come in boxes. Those boxes are broken down regularly and deposited inside there so that they can be recycled and repurposed, made into new items to be used again. If you think the trash disposal is a horrific thing to think about when it comes to a person being disposed of and lost in a pile of rotting garbage, I hate to tell you that the process of recycling cardboard like this is even more horrific when we're talking about a person being processed and not just cardboard. These bins, for one, you can see the way they're designed. They have this smaller opening in the front where cardboard boxes are meant to be inserted after they're broken down and slip through. However, there's a locked opening portion on top that opens once the recycling truck picks it up and dumps its contents inside their truck. But on the side, there's a door that opens for bigger items, like a body. In this case, it wouldn't have been hard for Connor to open that side door and throw Lauren inside. Sure enough, they find blood on the outside of that bin, and they locate this bracelet in front of it, which is identified as belonging to Lauren. Now, they know that they've uncovered a small piece of truth in Connor's labyrinth of lies. They quickly open this receptacle, hoping that they're going to find Lauren inside, but it's too late. It's already been emptied since October 27th. However, they do find blood inside and it matches Lauren's DNA. But where is she? This is devastating news, all of it, that Lauren's dead, that her body is missing, and that it may never be found. Now they have to relay this information to her family. Can you even imagine when Krista and Joe found out? Krista said that their worst fears were confirmed. They broke down. Her mom said she didn't get a chance to tell her goodbye. She didn't get a chance to say she loved her. She didn't get a chance to give her a hug because she didn't know that that was going to be the last time she would see her. Investigators didn't believe Connor's story. They didn't think drug dealers did this, but that was the information they had in that moment, and that is what they relayed to Lauren's family. But then, Crystal let it be known that when they heard that Connor was the last person with Lauren, they knew this was probably not going to end well, that Connor was dangerous, and that he and Lauren had domestic calls with police several times. She knew he was bad news, and she just couldn't believe this was real, that she would never see her daughter alive again. She said that all the things she had talked about with Lauren, everything she wanted to do in her life, would never happen. When Joe heard, he got up from the table and hit the wall. He fell apart. He was in tears. He just lost it. His only daughter, his little princess, she was never coming back. He said that Lauren was a wonderful person, that she had a full life ahead of her. She didn't deserve this. When the news got to Lauren's ex-husband, Zach, the father of their daughter, he said he was devastated. He said, "I kept telling her that he was not a good guy, that she could do so much better. It's just too bad that Lauren couldn't get far enough away from this man." By November 5th, investigators were trying to get Connor to confess that he was the one who killed Lauren and to stop placing blame elsewhere. So they questioned him about why he wasn't shot, and he told them that they'd have to find the drug dealers and ask them. But investigators were like, "How are we going to find a fictitious person?" Connor kept up the ruse, saying, "They're not fake, and he's not lying." When they asked him to give them the drug dealer's numbers, he couldn't. He expects them to believe that these two unknown men got in the car and that he's never once exchanged a text or a call with either one of them, and neither had Lauren. But the investigators finally broke him down. They told him they think what really happened was that something went on between Lauren and Connor in that car, and that it escalated into Connor killing Lauren. He finally admits that they're right, but still, his version is more tame. It's more tame than probably what the truth is. He keeps telling them that Lauren wouldn't get out of his car, and that he just happened to have a gun with him. He held it up and told her to get out, and that's when, according to him, the clip fell out and then the gun just went off. There was ringing in his ears, and afterward, he looked and saw that Lauren had been shot in the face. How brutal. Because we know that this wasn't an accident. We know that he purposely aimed that gun at her beautiful face. He looked at her and pulled the trigger, killing a girl that he once said he loved and cared about and connected with. But at least he admitted that it was him who pulled that trigger. The 22-year-old was arrested and sent to Tulsa County Jail, where he was charged with first-degree murder and desecration of a human corpse. They believe that Connor came to Mike's with a purpose that day, one that included a gun and getting Lauren alone so that he could end her life. But their focus right now was finding Lauren's body, and this search was intense. They had to track down the route that the recyclable items go down after they've been picked up from that receptacle. And it turns out that they're sent to a paper mill. Back on November 3rd, when they found Lauren's blood in that bin, the Broken Arrow Police Department sent 30 investigators to a paper mill in McCurtain County and Valiant, Oklahoma, where the recycling materials are processed. This facility is 200 miles away. It's a 3-hour drive. This is what it looked like back in 1975 when it was called the Weyerhaeuser Paper Mill. But in 2008, it was sold for $6 billion to International Paper Company, along with 9 other container board mills around the country. This is a massive operation. They have 72 packaging locations and 19 recycling facilities in 16 states. All this is to say, finding Lauren's body, or what was left of it, was going to be nearly impossible. This process is a very brutal one. Once picked up from that bin, the remnants of cardboard are dumped in a large pile, and then they're picked up by a front loader. This is actually a very big machine with a large bucket, so it would be very easy not to see a small person's lifeless body inside. Once full, the materials are then dumped into what's called an in-feed bunker. It looks just like this. The items are fed along a conveyor belt while being misted with water to prevent dust and other particles from getting into the air. Then it moves along, and the items are dropped into a very powerful, sharp metal rotating drum area where they are ripped apart and broken down further into smaller pieces. As you're probably aware, Lauren was moving along this process, and that reality was sinking in for the investigators. As this search was going on, they were becoming aware of how this whole operation takes place and how it plays out. Once these items pass through this area, they're picked up by a claw machine and are put through a rotating trommel. It looks like this and separates different sized items, which are then sent to different areas and sprayed with a powerful stream of hot water. Then, they're pressed through this belt system where they go through other sorting and breaking down processes until all of this is compressed firmly into bales of cardboard to be sent to other facilities and made into new products. Products like paper, cardboard boxes, and similar materials, which is another very extensive process. These bales are often sold to many other companies so that they can make items themselves, or they're processed right there at the International Paper Company. All of this is an automated process. It happens every day, all day long, and sadly, Lauren's remains went through this process. Investigators combed through acres of material, but there was no sign of Lauren or anything resembling her. This is what those bales look like. This is an actual police photo. They're huge, and it is devastating to think about Lauren going through all of that and now being lost somewhere. It's seriously the scariest part of this case to think about all of that. And it's unbelievable because once those bales are sold off, they go into a plant that looks like this and they come out looking like this. a huge 2-ton roll of paper. Then this gets turned into tissue boxes, cereal boxes, laundry detergent or fabric sheet boxes, and even mac and cheese boxes. This monster threw her away like trash, and this process didn't stop once it started. So at this point, the Broken Arrow Police Department calls in the Oklahoma City Metro Search and Rescue Team, and they bring in cadaver dogs, ones that can smell decomposition. They went to the plant and started outside. Here, they didn't indicate in any of these areas of debris, so they moved the dogs inside the facility. As the dogs made their way to the bales, they still were not alerting, so they took them to the processing area that I showed you. This is a 20-acre mill. It's the largest in the world. These dogs were taken to the belts, the machines, and the claws, and that is where they began indicating that they found their scent. They found Lauren's scent, decomposing human remains. She had been there, she had gone through the process, and now she was already gone. Now, the crime scene technicians are combing through these areas, and ultimately they found remnants of what they believed to be human bone fragments and skin. When they were tested, the pieces came back belonging to Lauren. The DNA was a match. The reality was that Lauren had sadly been processed at this recycling facility, and who knows where she ended up. A post was updated on the search and rescue team's Facebook where they sadly announced that Lauren was found deceased. Out of the over 300 comments, one was from someone who knew Connor. His name is Ronnie Sanders, and apparently he's the father of a friend of Connor's. He knew Connor when he was younger, and he said this, and I wanted to share it because I thought it was important. It said, quote, "Please don't get my comment twisted. First, I want to send my condolences to the family and friends of the girl. It is sad that they must now endure the loss that will forever change their lives. I hate that this happened. I especially hate it because Connor was, at a younger age, always welcome at our house, as he was one of my son's best friends. At their pre-driving age, 14 or so, he moved from Sula to Broken Arrow, and my son and Connor lost the availability to communicate as much as they once did. However, because unlike many of you who probably never knew him, I, however, did. I can't tell you what or where it went wrong, and I in no way feel he is justified by what he has done. I will, however, say that the Connor I knew wasn't a monster. He wasn't a person that I felt could ever do something even close to this. He instead was a normal child. I don't believe in any way that he planned this. I instead feel it was most likely something that escalated to a point of no return. And when it was over, he then thought to himself, what have I done? It's a sad fact that although the loss on the girl's part is greater, and the family lost their loved one, the truth is that 2 lives are lost today. 2 families are forever changed, and normalcy will forever be different for both families. We all should remember and remind our loved ones that it only takes a second to accidentally make a mistake that ends up a permanent one. Remind our children to walk away and call someone for advice before they do something that they will forever regret. I pray both families are able to somehow return to some form of normalcy in time. My prayers are with all families and friends." End quote. And as much as I believe this man was trying to help, as you can imagine, this comment didn't go over very well. Well, there were a lot of angry responses. For example, one person said, "All sympathy is for the murder of this young woman and her family. He made a choice, don't try and nice him out now." But others agreed it was well written, and yes, it's true, 2 families will be grieving. Well, more than that, actually, with all the lives that Lauren had touched. But there were a lot of assumptions in that post that I just read from this guy, and I don't know if I'm okay with that. He said that it was an accident, something that Connor didn't plan, and something he regretted. Well, that man wasn't there. And as the investigation went deeper, and this case was being built against Connor, more of the truth came out. And I'm going to get to that because I want to tell you what happened at the trial and how it all played out. But first, a message from Lauren's mom, when she was interviewed days after the news came out about what happened to her daughter. I'm going to play you some news clips, but I want you to kind of understand that she was trying to say, anyone is in this situation, and you've got all your friends telling you that this person is bad news. Listen to them because it's just a matter of walking away. Those are Krista's thoughts. Here's the clip of that interview with Krista that she did. She was so looking forward to trick-or-treating with her. That was what she was going to do that night. We knew that if Connor was the last person that she was with, that it was probably not going to end up very good. I don't want life to be easy for him at all. They've had domestic calls with the police department several times, and we knew we tried to get her to quit hanging out with him and just let him go. I just want to say that if anybody is in a situation like that, to get out. If you've got every one of your friends telling you that this person is bad news, listen to them. Listen to them, because it was a matter of, walking away. And it's true. If you're in a bad relationship, you should try to get out, but it's actually the most dangerous times in domestic situations. It's not easy. Now Krista was left collecting every picture that she could find of poor Lauren so that she could remember her the way that she was. The smiling, happy, beautiful little girl that she loved so much. She was trying to find any video or pictures that she could hunt down so she could cherish those memories. Here's one of Lauren singing in a competition. She had a beautiful voice. And of course, her and little Addie. Then, 3 months after her death, Krista also showed the media Lauren's old bedroom where she grew up. Here it is now, the way her parents left it when she moved out. The pink drapes, the piggy bank, her stuffed animals, her zebra-patterned bedspread, as well as a teddy bear that Krista said Lauren carried everywhere because it was her favorite when she was a little girl. And it's sad looking at all this, one of Lauren's favorites. She's carried this with her everywhere she went. And Krista had transformed this place into a space for Lauren's daughter, where Addison could find comfort now that her mom was gone. She had pulled out all of Lauren's old toys, so she could just surround little Addison with things that would remind her of her mommy. Here's what she had to say about it. It's a horrible visual thought in your mind that your daughter would be in that place. Another thing that Krista let the media know is that after Lauren's DNA was discovered at that mill, the company decided to recall more than 30,000 tons of bundles to try to prevent Lauren's remains from being processed any further, and that the family was so very thankful for that effort. We won't ever know what happened, but Krista's wish at this point was that they could find Lauren's body so she could finally say goodbye. But that wasn't going to happen. But Krista said that Lauren's legacy will live on because she leaves behind her 3-year-old daughter who looks exactly like her, and she really does. Her ex-husband Zach also expressed his deep sadness and concern regarding her murder in an interview on the news. Zach said that Addie missed Lauren so much. She loved her mama, and he just cannot believe that Connor took her away from her. Lauren's aunt posted this picture on Facebook. It's a picture of Lauren twirling around happily in her wedding dress and one of her and her papa. It said, "This beauty is safe in her papa's arms now. She loved her papa, and he loved her." Lauren's dad said to the media that it's true. She may have never been found at all if Connor hadn't confessed. She would have been long gone, and no clues would have been left behind. He also said that this being an accident was very unlikely, considering that Connor had a gun and Lauren did not. That makes sense. Losing someone is never easy, but when someone as young as Lauren is murdered, it hurts much more because it's not just her earthly presence that's taken away. Her future is gone. It's the death of all of the things she ever wanted to do. All the Christmases, the Halloweens, the birthdays, the death of any love she might have found one day with someone who truly loved her, any children she might have had, places that she might have seen. None of that will happen, but life goes on for everyone left behind. But for Lauren, her journey on Earth was forever paused right when it felt like it had just begun. Ultimately, during a search of Connor's apartment, they were able to locate a gun in the trash can, and police were able to piece together what they think actually happened that day. The truth is usually far simpler than the lies they believe. Connor went to Mike's with the intention to convince Lauren to take a drive with him, and they ended up at an apartment complex parking lot, where ultimately Connor pulled out a gun and shot Lauren. And after Connor brutally murdered a woman that he once claimed to love, he disposed of her and then went on about his day as though nothing happened. Not only did he go to work only 9 minutes away from where he just dumped her body, but while he was there, he thought it was a good idea to clean up that crime scene. So who better to help than his ex-girlfriend Alex, a girl he broke up with before ultimately dating the girl he just killed. But what they didn't know was why that motive would come out at trial, which commenced in January of 2020, just a month before Lauren's family was finally ready to hold a memorial for her, a year after her murder. It was a celebration of life. It was held on December 5th, 2019, which would have been Lauren's 23rd birthday. It was held at the Rose Chapel at Floral Haven Funeral Home in Broken Arrow. Family, friends, and loved ones gathered to honor Lauren's life and her memory. The family said that they needed to hold a memorial ceremony not only for themselves but for Addison. They said that even though Addison was only 4, she could understand that something really bad happened to her mama. Lauren's father said, "I waited because I wanted to, but the fact is we all need some type of closure, and her daughter needs it more than anyone to move on." Joe loved his daughter more than anything. All he wanted was for her to be happy and have a good life. But an evil man came into her life and took all of that away. Joe finds solace in the memories he shared with his daughter. Despite all of his heartache, those memories are what keeps him going. Joe affectionately referred to Lauren as his Lala. It was a nickname that he had given her, and that just broke my heart when I heard him say it. Lauren's mom wants Addison to know that her mommy tried to be the mom that she deserved. It wasn't Lauren's or Addison's fault that they were separated and that Lauren was taken away. By January 2020, the jury was ready, 6 men and 8 women. Connor, of course, pleaded not guilty despite all the evidence that was stacked against him. He truly believed that he was going to get away with murder, or, at the very least, he was going to get a lesser charge. He believed in his innocence so much that he allowed Lauren's family to be re-victimized, having to sit through this entire murder trial where they had to hear every brutal and painful little detail about Lauren's final moments and her desecrated remains. The story that the defense tried to paint was that the gun had accidentally gone off, that Connor wasn't responsible, and that Connor never meant for any of this to happen. He never accepted any accountability for this crime. But the prosecution wasted no time calling their witnesses to the stand, including Connor's ex-girlfriend Alex. The trial was painful. It was emotional. It was draining for everyone involved. However, despite all of Lauren's family's anguish, they knew how important it was to hold Connor accountable for his actions. And as this trial progressed, the state presented very compelling evidence, which cast doubt on Connor's claims that this was a terrible accident. You know why? Because Connor was involved in a secret relationship with another woman while he was with Lauren. After sifting through everything that was left on Connor's phone, they found messages in the days leading up to Lauren's murder, just days before. These messages revealed everything about this new woman that he was dating at the same time that he was on and off with Lauren. Apparently, Lauren didn't know about this other girl, but this new girlfriend knew all about Lauren, and she didn't like her. So, you know what she did? She broke up with Connor when she found out that he had been hanging out with Lauren. Detectives also found text messages that Connor sent to his ex, Alex. In them, he talks about how Lauren just won't leave him alone. In one of these text messages sent by Connor to Alex, he makes a derogatory remark about Lauren, referring to her as a parasite. He was expressing his frustration, saying that Lauren ruined his life because he wanted to be with another woman, and Lauren just wouldn't stop. She wasn't willing to let him go. So Lauren was standing in the way, and from an investigative perspective, this offered insight into what Connor's state of mind might have been like on the day he killed her. They theorized that Connor wanted Lauren gone, even if it meant that he had to do it himself and kill her, anything to be with this new girlfriend and dump the old one like garbage. And that's exactly what he did. He threw out Lauren's body like trash, as if she didn't matter any more than the days-old newspaper and soggy cardboard that lay around her. But she did matter. She mattered to her brothers, whom she always fiercely protected. She mattered to her mother, who loved her since the day that she was growing in her womb. She mattered to her father, who had been her first love. And she mattered to her daughter, who will never truly know her mother. All of their lives were changed the moment that Connor decided to pull that trigger. And though the defense pressed forward, Claiming this was all an accident, the jury had their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Next was the sentencing, which happened a few months later in March. The 23-year-old Connor Brunner was given a life sentence in prison, with the possibility of parole after at least 38 years and 3 months. He's currently serving his life sentence at North Fork Correctional Center in Beckham County, Oklahoma. After the sentencing, Lauren's mom said this. She said, "There won't be any closure. We don't have a body to bury, and we don't really have a memorial. There's not that gravesite per se that you can have, so we have to create one of our own." What's probably the most frustrating thing about this case is how unnecessary this all was. Lauren did not have to die. Connor could have just walked out of her life and not harmed her, other than just leaving her with a broken heart. But unfortunately, despite how tragically unnecessary this crime was, it's not that unique. So many lives are lost at the hands of people who claimed to love them, and I can only hope that Lauren's story will reach someone who needs to hear it. If you are that person, and you're in a relationship that's placing you at risk, please reach out for help. Leaving a toxic and abusive relationship is not easy. You can't just walk out the door, I understand that. But there are people out there to help you. You don't have to live like this, and more importantly, you can save yourself. You do not have to die like this. As for Addison and the rest of Lauren's family, all we can ask for is that they can find some peace. A loss like this is never fully grieved, there's never full closure, and you never truly heal. But I do hope that they can find peace and purpose in the midst of their heartache. Just last year, in 2022, her family and friends went to the Water Lantern Festival, and they lit these beautiful lanterns on the water with pictures of Lauren and quotes and memories written on them. It was just so beautiful, just like Lauren herself, a beautiful soul that was gone way too soon.